Guys, I'm back, and hopefully, this is going to be the last part of the book. So, I'm going to play the book. I think we have roughly about, I don't know, a few hours left. Oh, well, it might be two more. Might be one more after this one. So, I'm just going to, hey, Janice, how are you? Welcome back. Welcome back. Hey, Mimi. Well, I'm just going to be playing this for you guys. Um, so you guys could get like the rest of this book. Um, I will catch you guys in a few because remember I told you I was going to do some stuff around the house. So I'm going to continue. This is chapter 10 in Holly Madison's Down the Rabbit Hole. This is her account of what happened at the mansion in her relationship with Hugh Hefner. So, guys, I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will check back and forth with you guys as we continue with the reading. Okay, so here it is, Holly Madison, Down the Rabbit Hole.
Chapter 10. I can't help it, said Alice very meekly. I'm growing. You have no right to grow here, said the Dormouse. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I think a jewelry line would be really cute, I suggested to Darlene, one of the Playboy licensing department associates. With ratings so high and growing, it dawned on Playboy to begin merchandising the show and the girlfriends to increase profits and capitalize on its popularity before it was too late. So they asked Darlene and some other licensing execs to come speak with the three of us. They should be specific to our lifestyle shown on TV, I continued. Charm bracelets are really popular, so how about one with cute charms like a tiny dog, a champagne bottle, a jet? I began doodling the design on one of the HMH, for Hugh Marston Hefner, monogrammed notepads placed around the dining room table. That's a really great idea, she exclaimed, watching me draw the little trinkets on a large link bracelet. Wow, you can actually draw. At the time, the licensing department was one of the star money-making divisions of Playboy Enterprises. Playboy clothing and accessories had been popular ever since Sarah Jessica Parker wore a gold rabbit head necklace on an episode of Sex and the City. And for the first time ever, the show was single-handedly guiding Playboy into, dare I say, almost family-friendly mainstream status. Our show was packaged in such a way that, believe it or not, many adults were watching it with their kids. The series, though loaded with sexual innuendo, was so colorful and cartoony that it almost felt more Scooby-Doo than sexy. Girls Next Door merchandise was a natural integration. However, Playboy licensing was extremely cautious not to directly associate any one product with the Girls Next Door in order to avoid owing any sales percentages to the network, save for the Girls Next Door book, calendar, and the bobblehead dolls, all of which were things I pushed to make happen. Playboy accessories were already big sellers online, through the catalog and in boutiques, so I figured jewelry was the smartest fit for our first collaboration. Together with Playboy's jewelry manufacturer, I created my capsule collection consisting of earrings, necklaces, and bracelets. When the show was at the height of its popularity, so was the Vegas Renaissance, and it quickly became a popular destination for us on the series. If we were married to the mansion, then Las Vegas was our mistress. The Playboy Club inside the Palms Casino Resort opened in October 2006, and shortly after, Playboy Licensing had the brilliant idea, no sarcasm, it was actually pretty good, to create Girls Next Door slot machines. We were made aware of the project and expected to be thrilled at the honor alone. No one mentioned any sort of compensation for use of our likeness or any percentage on the back end. We were really excited about the idea nonetheless. Who wouldn't get a kick out of seeing their faces on a slot machine? We simply didn't realize that we should be getting a fee for such a thing. By this time, Bridget, Kendra, and I had signed on with a management company. Hef had worked closely with this company in the past and had made friends with the owner, so I suppose he didn't feel too threatened by us branching out in this way. Hef kept us aggressively sheltered, and any press we were allowed to do was pre-approved by Playboy Public Relations and only done if it promoted the brand, the show, or Hef specifically. Nothing spotlighting us as individuals was ever given the green light. For example, Hef refused to let me try to compete on the first season of Celebrity Apprentice because he didn't want me to go to New York for a few weeks. But coincidentally, a Playmate of the Year he was eager to promote landed the spot instead. For the most part, we chose our battles and did as Hef requested when it came to our careers, but the slot machine idea struck a chord. "No way," an acquaintance of mine told me over the phone one afternoon. "I'm going to look into this. Slot machines are big money, Holly. They're planning on using your names and likenesses. They have to pay you for that." Shortly after the licensing department was approached about compensating us, the slot machine plans came to a grinding halt. It seemed insane to abandon it altogether, but it was never brought up again. Either there were too many hands in the pot to make it profitable, or no one wanted to concede to the fact that we should be paid for the use of our names and likenesses. God forbid they open up a can of worms by making us feel important, or put enough money in our pockets to feel independent. My last attempt at foraying into the world of Playboy licensing was a pitch for Bridget, Kendra, and me to create swimwear lines, an idea they were initially enthusiastic about. They immediately greenlit the project, and I began designing my collection. It went far enough into development that samples of all my designs were manufactured. But one day, without any explanation, the project was shut down. Bridget, Kendra, and I were so used to defeat by this point, we didn't even question the decision. It was never mentioned again until one day I noticed the Playboy catalog on Mary's desk. I spun it around to face me and gasped. There she was, a sultry Sarah Underwood lying across the cover in a sleek, sophisticated black monokini with a tiny gold Playboy logo beneath the belly button. "What the fuck?" I whispered under my breath. That was my design. Did Playboy licensing actually go ahead and manufacture and sell my design without even letting me know? Sure, it could have been a mistake since the same manufacturers that made the Playboy line made the Girls Next Door samples, and maybe Playboy even had the legal right to use my ideas this way, but it still made me feel like dirt. It wasn't about the lack of compensation. It was about feeling owned, like I was Playboy's personal property and could be walked all over like a doormat. I didn't even bother confronting anyone about it because I knew it was a losing battle. It definitely made me question my loyalty to the brand, though. As Girls Next Door went into its fourth season, I finally had the opportunity to take Bridget and Kendra to my hometown. We visited Bridget's and Kendra's respective hometowns in the first two seasons, and I had been lobbying to take the girls to Alaska for quite some time. Needless to say, it was a little more expensive to get to Alaska than to Lodi or San Diego, so it took a little time for production to come around. Hef even tried to throw a wrench in the plans when he made it clear that of all the places he had never wanted to go, Alaska topped the list. We were finally able to make the trip along with my mom and dad. Hef stayed home, of course. I loved taking the girls to Craig, the tiny town I grew up in, and to Ketchikan, the nearest city where my family and I used to go when we needed to buy something that Craig couldn't offer. There were only a handful of stores in Craig. Bouncing back and forth between islands on the tiny otter plane was an adventure in itself. Our plane broke down midair and the pilot had to make an emergency landing. This was one time Kendra was really afraid of flying. She had to have a few drinks before getting on our return flight. Alaska is rugged and not for everyone, so I appreciated that the girls were enthusiastic about the trip and made the effort to have a good time. The episode turned out to be my favorite of the entire series. One shot in particular stands out in my mind. The three of us took a moment to quietly swing on a swing set while the camera shot us from the ground, three dandelions of varying height echoing our three figures in the foreground. It seemed like such an innocent moment, and the whole episode captured us as ordinary, real people, not as the mansion mistress cartoon characters we usually played on TV. Later that season, the cameras returned to Studio West with me for an episode titled Go West, Young Girl. In the process of finding a playmate for the upcoming September issue, I invited 4 candidates out to test for the slot. There was a brunette named Melanie from San Diego, raven-haired Valerie Mason from Louisiana, platinum blonde Kayla Collins from Pennsylvania, and a quirky 18-year-old from Las Vegas named Angel Perino. Not only was I thrilled to have an episode focus so much on the job I had grown to love, I made new friends and even found a few playmates in the process. Valerie Mason, with her classically cute face, would end up being chosen as Miss September. Kayla, surprisingly, was turned down by Hef for looking too much like too many other playmates. Hey, at least he was starting to appreciate variety. Kayla ended up becoming Miss August 2008 after Hef's friends made a fuss over her when he screened the Girls Next Door episode for them. My favorite candidate was Angel Perino. She had an electric personality and the most fun sense of humor. People couldn't stop laughing when they hung out with her, especially me. I'd never had a friend I laughed so hard with. Along with German playmate Juliana Marino, we became an inseparable trio, hanging out and goofing off whenever I had free time. Hef didn't end up selecting Angel as a playmate, and I was very sad to see her go when it was time for her to return home. My sister's wedding made up 2 episodes of season 4, Jamaican Me Crazy and Wedding Bells. I was surprised when my sister said yes to the idea of the Girls Next Door covering her wedding, but since she had planned a very small destination wedding in Jamaica, it turned out that she thought it would be a great way to share the celebration with all of her friends that couldn't be there. Bridget, Kendra, and I couldn't have had a better time. For whatever reason, Hef wasn't interested in attending, but I can't imagine his cranky, high-maintenance personality in laid-back Jamaica anyway. The 3 of us girls had an amazing few days at Sandals and a Grill, relaxing, ziplining, and exploring with my family. There was no drama, just a truly memorable trip and a beautiful beach wedding. I was the maid of honor, my sister looked stunning, and my family and 2 closest girlfriends were as happy as could be. Who could ask for anything more? Playboy could. Just before filming was set to begin on season 5, there was a mad rush to get Bridget, Kendra, and me under contract. Prior to the first episode of the series, we had each signed the most basic of television releases, and nothing more. Realizing that the stars of this hit show were theoretically free to walk away and pursue other television opportunities at any time, someone must have panicked. Unbeknownst to us, Hef arranged to have us contracted under Alta Loma, Playboy's production company, which basically meant that we would have a talent agreement binding us to Hugh Hefner. Letting us negotiate directly with the network was never going to be an option, probably because it meant he would have had to relinquish too much control over his girlfriends. After all, what if E offered us something greater than being one of Hugh Hefner's blonde bimbos? As I understood it, the network was willing to work with us in this fashion as long as Alta Loma could show they had us under contract, and fast. It all happened so quickly, I can't even remember how I initially heard about the contract. What I do recall is getting really worked up and marching down to the master bedroom to tell Hef I had no intention of signing. I think it's in bad taste to sign a contract to be your girlfriend, I maintained. Given that the show was about Hef and who he is dating, as opposed to any of the 3 of us, as they like to remind us regularly, I felt signing a contract with him was taking away my option of walking away from the relationship at any time. It would be just another facet of this relationship that would make me feel like a hooker. It's just weird. I understand the notion, but it's important to me that you sign it, he said, looking at me with sad puppy dog eyes. If you care about me, you'll do it. In the end, it was always about Hef. Quietly, I did my best to consider my options. I didn't want to be coerced into doing anything else for this man. Sensing my hesitation and realizing that my heartstrings might not convince me, Hef decided to appeal to my business sense, telling me that if we didn't all sign, the network may not order another season. As further encouragement, Hef had told me Bridget already signed her contract, but I didn't learn until afterwards that she did so completely against her better judgment. As a reasonable person would, Bridget asked to have some time to have her lawyers look over the paperwork, but was denied. I imagine she was given the trademark mansion attitude. If you don't like it, you can leave. Begrudgingly, she signed the contract. Okay, I finally relented. I'll look at it, but I want you to know I don't like this. I understand, Hef said, unable to contain his smile. He didn't care what the hell I thought, as long as I walked my butt down to the office and signed those papers. Still in my pajamas, I trudged down to Mary's office at the other end of the mansion. Without saying a word, I sat myself in the chair next to her desk and started playing with her white Maltese pup named Miss Kitty. So, Mary started, looking over the top of her small framed eyeglasses. Did Hef tell you about the contracts? Yes, I grumbled before pleading my case, and I'm not thrilled about it. I think it's wrong. Mary sat in silence with her arms folded, allowing me my few moments to vent. Because the show is about Hef's girlfriends, I feel like I'm signing a contract to be in a relationship, I whined. I was beyond frustrated. I had my back against the ropes. If I wanted to move forward with the show for a fifth season, I had to bind myself to Hef's production company. What if I wanted to move out? Or do another show? I felt like this contract might make that impossible. That's not really what it's about, Holly, Mary reassured me, her voice smooth and calm. E is just hesitant to move forward with the show if their talent isn't under any kind of contract. That's all. I know, but I allowed my voice to trail off. I'd already had the same argument with Hef, and it wasn't going to result in any different outcome with Mary. I fell silent for a few moments before asking, Do they have to be signed today? Yes, Mary said very matter-of-factly. They need them back today. Why did we get them so last minute then? I asked, my anxiety starting to escalate again. We don't even have time to look them over. The contracts are with Alta Loma, dear, Mary went on, sidestepping any explanation as to why we were just now receiving them. You know if there's a problem, Hef will release you from it. But would he? I know that in Mary's heart, she sincerely thought that Hef was a good man, just as I believed at the time. But a nagging voice in the back of my head kept warning me not to trust this situation. If signing this contract was really so important to everyone, I decided to just get it over with. I knew that ultimately I had no choice. Hef would find a way to corner me into signing it, so I might as well just save myself any further aggravation. Fine, I said, grabbing a pen on Mary's desk. Where do I sign? I scribbled my name on the contract that Mary nonchalantly shoved under my nose and handed it back to her. Now, what to do about the Kendra problem, Mary continued. Kendra was in the Dominican Republic for a paid nightclub appearance, so she could hardly sign the paperwork by E's alleged deadline. But Hef and his team must have found some kind of solution if all three of our signed contracts were indeed delivered to E that afternoon. I can't say this with certainty since I never witnessed pen to paper, but the gossip around the mansion was that someone on Hef's staff must have had to forge Kendra's contract in order to meet the network's deadline. Of course, it's also possible that E never even gave Hef a deadline, or that he used a false date to get us to sign without giving us the opportunity to really review the documents. Who knows? All I know is the whole thing seemed highly unusual to me. Our fifth cycle would end up being a season of growing pains. Looking back, it makes sense that this was our last season as a trio. From an outsider's perspective, however, everything looked like it couldn't be going any better. The series had become such a phenomenon, there was even a movie being made about it. Well, sort of. The House Bunny, starring Anna Faris, was a comedy set at the Playboy Mansion centering on a fictional playmate who finds herself kicked out of the mansion upon turning 27 and takes refuge in a sorority house. In the film, Anna plays a mansion resident named Shelley, a character that is clearly based on Bridget. You should have been the sporty one, Kendra teasingly pouted at Anna the first time we met her as she prepared to shoot a scene in the mansion's backyard. Anna was done up with curly blonde hair, a frilly pink outfit, and her character had a grumpy pet cat similar to Bridget's cat, Gizmo. Bridget's pink striped bedroom was used as Shelley's room in the movie. Even the high-pitched voice and sunny Pollyanna attitude Anna affected for her character were very much Bridget's style. We had cameos in the film, playing ourselves for a few scenes. The movie would hit the #2 spot at the box office on its opening weekend. Even I couldn't believe what a phenomenon this frilly, frothy, girly, and in many ways make-believe version of the Playboy world had become. Not everything in our world was cotton candy and fluffy bunny tails, however. That year, Kendra started taking Accutane for an acne problem she had grown increasingly self-conscious of. To me, Kendra was a beautiful girl, with acne or without, so on one hand I couldn't understand her paranoia, but on the other hand I could. Every girl who ever lived at the mansion knew that her entire value in Hef's eyes depended on the way she looked. In fact, in an interview from the previous year for an Elle magazine article, Kendra confessed, "I'm very insecure right now about my face. I get scared with Hef looking at me at the mansion and maybe thinking I'm ugly." I certainly understood how she felt. In that same article, Hef went out of his way to tell the writer that I had only become beautiful and that I didn't look the same as when he first met me, going on to attribute my new acceptability to my nose job. Gee, thanks, Hef. Whether it was an excuse not to have to adhere to the filming schedules she hated keeping, or if she really had grown debilitatingly insecure, Kendra was often refusing to come out of her room to film scenes. I would find out later that this was around the time she started secretly seeing her future husband, Hank Baskett, so maybe that factored into the equation as well. The producers were desperate to find someone to take Kendra's spot, should she decide to stop coming out completely. No one was talking about adding a new girlfriend or anything, but I was asked to recruit some girls that I thought would be good for the show to stay at the Bunny House for a month or so while we filmed. I chose Laura Croft, a wild and crazy playmate from Florida, Kayla Collins, the bouncy blonde from the Go West Young Girl episode, and Angel Perino, also from the Go West episode, the funny girl with the high-pitched voice from Las Vegas. Having the girls around proved helpful as Kendra refused to participate in quite a few of the episodes. Sometimes she would salvage her spot at the last minute by agreeing to film something by herself. Other times she was just missing in action. When Bridget produced a campy B movie called The Telling, Kendra didn't take part even though she was offered a role in the film. While Bridget and I traveled with Laura, Kayla, and Angel to Chicago, Dallas, and New York to scout playmates, Kendra chose to stay home. One evening, Hef popped around the corner into my vanity area and announced that he was kicking Kayla out of the bunny house. "Why?" I asked. I couldn't imagine what Kayla had done to warrant such dislike and was eager to stick up for my new friend. "Kendra doesn't like her," he said firmly. "She thinks Kayla is starting trouble between her and some of the other playmates. She feels like she's trying to take her place on the show. She's toxic. She has to go." "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't get it. Maybe I should ask Kendra about it. Kayla likes Kendra as far as I know. Who is she supposedly starting problems with?" I asked. "Other playmates," Hef reiterated as if that made him any more clear than before. He went on to say how hysterical Kendra was about it. I couldn't figure out what this was really about and pleaded for Hef to let Kayla stick around for the remaining weeks that she was scheduled to stay. "I'll talk to Kendra about it and make sure everything is okay," I promised, trying to play the peacekeeper. Hef agreed to let her stay, but threatened to have her leave if she made another misstep. He waved a finger at me and walked out of the room. I wasn't too worried about the situation. I assumed Kendra felt threatened by another petite, energetic, platinum blonde running around in front of the cameras. She'll get over it when Kayla leaves, I thought. Later, I would hear through the grapevine that Kendra's future husband, Hank, was apparently after Kayla before he met Kendra. I have no idea if this is true or not, but it would explain the freakout. For the second half of season 5, the girls in the bunny house left and the three amigos gravitated back together. We invited all of our moms and our house mother, Mary O'Connor, out for a group spa day, visited Barbie Benton's outrageous home in Aspen, and went on a road trip for Bridget's sister Anastasia's birthday. The three of us attended our friend Stacy Burke's wedding in Vegas. Stacy was always identified as Hef's former girlfriend when her name popped up on screen during an episode, as if there wasn't any other way to identify her. Hef truly loved to believe that the highlight of any of his exes' lives was the time they spent with him. He also loved to remind viewers of all the beautiful women he dated. Towards the end of the season, in the summer of 2008, we shot our fourth Playboy cover slated for February 2009. This one would end up being our last. After much lobbying, Hef agreed to a 3-split run, which meant we each had our own cover. It felt like a gigantic milestone. Fans loved watching our shoots on the series, which is most likely why we ended up getting 4 covers. And since 3 separate shoots would mean more footage for the show, production kindly coughed up the budget, $10,000 per shoot. I was so grateful that production was doing this for us. I definitely felt like they went more out of their way for us and enjoyed our triumphs more than Hef did. While Hef scoffed at the initial idea, to him we still couldn't stand on our own. Even he couldn't refuse a free $30,000. Hef approved my idea for the cover. I posed each of us in front of the mansion in such a way that if you line up the covers, it created one panoramic shot. Another first for the magazine. I loved being a part of these little firsts. To make our 3 pictorials look as varied as possible, I talked to the girls about each of us using a different photographer. Bridget worked with Arnie on an elaborate circus design. I suggested Kendra pair with Steven to shoot her for a Sports Illustrated-inspired beach shoot, and I decided on up-and-coming photographer W.B. Fontenot for a glamorous, yet dark, old Hollywood shoot at the historic Los Angeles Theater. Unfortunately, I discovered at the last minute that the decadent old theater's fee to allow production to film there was out of our budget. Only the still shoot was affordable. Since I wanted my third of the pictorial to be done my way, I decided to cover the cost of the photo shoot out of my own pocket and provide a different scenario for Girls Next Door to film. Additionally, this would give me rights to the photos and the ability to grant Playboy the license to print only the photos I approved. In order to provide content for the TV show, I decided to do something a little experimental and out of the box for a Playboy shoot. Since the magazine would be using my theater photos, what I shot for the show could be done with television in mind and not the magazine. Back then, there wasn't much room to move when it came to Playboy photo shoots. Hef had very particular tastes, so if you didn't want to waste everyone's time and money, you didn't stray far from the formula. One of the recent activities we had filmed for Girls Next Door was scuba diving. I fell in love with it. We had filmed our training in the mansion pool. I was astounded by how beautiful all the natural rock looked underwater. Inspired by that day, Barry and I did my shoot in the mansion pool, setting up several surreal underwater scenes. A tea party, a chained escape artist, a mermaid, etc. It felt amazing to do something so different. The underwater photos were used as bonus photos in the Playboy Cyber Club, as most Playboy pictorials set aside a few bonus extras from each published pictorial for their membership site. Hef, never missing a chance to paint me as ugly, would later publicly announce that my underwater photos were never published because they weren't flattering, when in fact they were never meant for the magazine in the first place. The recent domestic bliss at the mansion was too good to last. While the television show had bolstered Hef's mood for quite some time, he was eventually brought back down to earth by the sad financial state of Playboy Enterprises. It's no secret that the company hadn't been profitable in years. I remember seeing a TV news magazine story on the subject even before I moved into the mansion, but what I didn't know was that things had gone from bad to worse. It was 2008 and the economy was teetering on its ear. Coincidentally or not, Hef was turning into a monster around this time. Bridget, Kendra, and I had each other's backs. It was next to impossible to create conflict between us. Without the drama and infighting he so craved, lashing out at me became his new way of letting off steam. Because I was the main girlfriend and meekest one in the bunch, Hef always felt safest picking on me. Sure, he lashed out at the other girls from time to time, but he was more cautious about it with them. He recognized that any of the other girlfriends would be way more likely to pack up and leave if they'd had enough, so I was usually the one who he took his frustrations out on. In years past, when Hef and I had problems, I always blamed the other girlfriends for the drama. Without any mean girl scapegoats left, I was slowly beginning to realize that Hef being mean was just Hef being mean. Count it cumulatively! Hef yelled so loudly that someone clear across the street could have heard him. As Hef's two sons, Marston and Cooper, got older, game night with the girlfriends eventually replaced Tuesday's family night. Those game nights became a mind-numbing ritual at best. Bridget, Kendra, and I would gather around the dining room table with Hef and whatever girls were visiting the mansion that week and play games. I loved Monopoly and Clue, but he quickly lost interest in those games. Hef was introduced to a very simple domino game called Mexican Train and became instantly addicted. Ever the creature of habit, Hef had us up playing Mexican Train every Tuesday for hours at a time. I loved it the first few times we played, but the game was so mind-numbingly easy, I quickly became bored. One night, Hef was particularly uptight and kept anxiously checking the score pad over my shoulder. When he realized that I was keeping track of the scores per game, as I usually did, instead of cumulatively, we played many rounds of the game in a row, he blew a gasket. Do you even know what cumulative means? He screamed in my face so ferociously that it made my blood boil. I wanted to give him my cumulative SAT scores and stomp out of the room, but I restrained myself. Clearly, he was looking for a fight, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I took a deep breath and looked him square in the eye. Yes, I said firmly and evenly. Everyone else was silent. Kendra and Bridget had been on the receiving end of such temper tantrums and unnecessary cruelty themselves, so I knew they were cringing for me as they looked down at their dominoes. It wasn't just the verbal disrespect that was wearing on my nerves. The limitations of mansion life were starting to get old. After 7 years living under Hef's strict rules, I thought I could have earned enough respect to be allowed to bend the rules every now and then. Even prisoners get points for good behavior. But unless cameras were following me, I still wasn't permitted to spend a night away from the mansion. Looking back now, I get frustrated with myself for being so blind. I was complaining because my boyfriend wouldn't allow me to spend the night away from his home, because he wouldn't allow me to stay out without him past 9 p.m. As a 28-year-old woman, I still had a curfew. I had never even asked to spend an off-camera night away from the mansion until a worthy occasion presented itself. Playmate Tiffany Fallon invited us to her wedding in Mexico to Rascal Flatts guitarist Joe Don Rooney. A charming Southern girl, Tiffany was one of the most beautiful women ever to grace the pages of Playboy, and truly a joy to be around. Bridget and I were ecstatic when we received the invitation, which included gorgeous luggage tags with our name and addresses printed on them. I've never been to Cabo before, I exclaimed to Bridget, glowing with anticipation. Bridget and I looked into flights from Los Angeles into Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, to see if we could fly in and out the same day. Despite being only a 2.5-hour flight, none were direct, and international travel is always a bit more time-consuming. A day trip just didn't seem feasible or like any fun. Since Hef thought the world of Tiffany, I figured we might actually have a shot at attending. But it all depended on what kind of a mood I caught him in. After talking it over ad nauseum with Mary, I got up the courage to ask Hef if Bridget and I could have a night away. Kendra was invited as well, but since she didn't want to pay for her own travel, she opted out. He says we can go, I exclaimed excitedly into the ancient, crusty, cream-colored phone in my dressing room. I heard Bridget squeal on the other end of the line. Much to my surprise, Hef had given me a favorable response and told me to work out the details and let him know how long we'd be gone. I felt like Cinderella finally getting to go to the ball. I couldn't believe our good luck. I was so excited to have my first girls' night out in over 7 years. We'll have to make travel plans right away. Flights, hotels, transportation, I rattled into the receiver. If we leave in the morning, we'll get there with plenty of time to get ready for the wedding and the party. Party? Like a record player screeching to a halt, I heard my plans instantly evaporate. Hef repeated himself. You're not going to a party. It was as if he appeared out of nowhere, having changed into his blue flannel pajamas, clearly oblivious to the fact that it was still daylight outside. Well, yeah, I began fumbling. I meant the wedding reception. It's like I told you, we can't get a flight back late enough to be able to attend the ceremony and reception. We'd be spending more time traveling to Mexico than actually in Mexico. I prayed he would see this logic, but Hef let out a stifled, sarcastic chuckle as if to mock me. He wasn't even actually listening to me. You're not going to any parties, he said firmly before shuffling his feet across the hardwood floor back into the bedroom. The trip to Mexico is off. Without uttering a word to Bridget, who I was certain overheard the whole ordeal, I gently put down the receiver as tears welled up in my eyes. I realized in that moment nothing was ever going to change. My years of dedication earned me nothing. All I had to show for it was an increasingly bitter boyfriend and no hope for a future. I'm so depressed, I don't know what to do. I'm not happy here anymore, I told Bridget as we commiserated over not being allowed to attend our friend's wedding. Truth be told, I had never been happy at the mansion, but I had always been able to put on a facade leading others to believe that I was. After all, Hef couldn't be seen having unhappy girlfriends, could he? I had been fooling someone else all these years as well, myself. While I had come into the mansion looking for a temporary safe harbor and a possible stepping stone to a Hollywood career, I had fallen down a rabbit hole of nasty girls, a degrading love life, eroded self-esteem, and total fear of judgment from the outside world. I felt like a failure on my mission to make something out of myself. I had tried to rationalize my choices by convincing myself that I had fallen in love with Hef and just wanted to settle down and have a family. I know how absolutely insane it sounds to want to have kids with someone in their 70s. You're basically robbing a child of his or her father before it is even born. Now that I'm a mom myself, the idea seems even more unpalatable. But I suppose I thought of it as a ticket out, in more ways than one. The last time the mansion had been multiple girlfriend free was when Hef was married and had 2 children. So, considering the mindset I was in, that seemed like an ideal scenario for me. I had convinced myself that the multiple girlfriends were the problem because I just couldn't admit to myself that I had made a terrible choice moving into the mansion in the first place. It was cognitive dissonance at its finest. There was also the part of me that was grateful for the things Hef had afforded me: food and shelter when I needed it, the allowance put towards paying off the debts I had from college, and the opportunities to be on a television show. Though there was plenty to complain about in the way I was treated, I was grateful for the good things and couldn't stand to be just like so many of the girls who had come before me, taking and running with no shame. Attempting the marriage and kids game, knowing deep down that it was a dead end, was perhaps my subconscious attempt to end the relationship in the nicest way I could think of. I then confessed something to Bridget that had up to that point been top secret, only known to me, Hef, Mary, and a few doctors. A step towards settling down had been made. Hef had submitted semen samples to a fertility doctor, only to find what the doctor predicted all along, that nothing from this 70-something-year-old man was viable. I'm sure Hef knew this too, and that was the only reason he decided to humor me and submit anything. I had made it clear to him several times that I wasn't going to be happy settling down at the mansion without a family, and this was his way of trying to save the relationship, though I'm sure he was quite relieved to dodge having another child. This was concrete proof slapping me in the face that there was no future for me at the mansion, and it was either sit there and rot or take the plunge and face the world. I couldn't even admit wanting to leave to Bridget. I just told her how heartbroken I was over the outcome of the tests and that I didn't know what to do with my life. Bridget was a little surprised, but not as shocked to hear the secret scoop as one might think. She knew I was miserable and that I had been for a while. She knew I wanted a family in my life someday and that that wasn't compatible with life at the mansion. She also knew of my other fear. After being one of Hef's 7 concubines, would anyone even want me now? Had I ruined myself forever by making this choice? She was a consoling friend and a great listener, but she didn't really know what to say. She had her own set of frustrations with mansion life and didn't have the answers. There was something else happening that was distancing me from Hef, and maybe he felt it. I was starting to realize that perhaps spending the rest of my, or perhaps more accurately, the rest of Hef's life at the mansion was not what I truly desired. It had been years since Hef had chased after any other girls. It was becoming increasingly clear that Bridget and Kendra were restless and thinking about leaving, and that Hef was fine with that, too. When I wasn't burying my head in my work, I was starting to panic inside. Was this really what I wanted? As becoming Hef's one and only came closer and closer to becoming a reality, the truth was clear to me. I didn't want someone who wanted to settle down with me because he was getting too old and tired to continue his Playboy lifestyle. I didn't want someone who wanted to settle down with me because I was convenient and docile, the perfect girlfriend. I'd always wanted to find a soulmate who was creative, ambitious, adventurous. And yes, Hef might have been the epitome of all three of those things at some point in his life, but that point was long gone, probably before I was even born. What was left was an old man running like crazy on the treadmill that was life at the mansion, desperate to live up to his image. I felt horribly conflicted. I couldn't quite admit it to myself yet, but I needed to find a way out. In the spring of 2008, Playboy searched for its 55th anniversary playmate to be featured in the January 2009 issue. Back in its heyday, when Playboy was still in the home of every red-blooded American male, the magazine would host a highly publicized nationwide search, a la the Millennium Playmate, to find the perfect girl for the anniversary issue, inspired by movie producer David O. Selznick's search for the actress to play Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. When Ukrainian model Dasha Astafieva happened across Mary's desk in the pages of the Eastern European countries edition of Playboy, I knew she was perfect. The black-haired beauty with ice blue eyes was the clear frontrunner, but Girls Next Door producers and I wanted to create a 2-episode America's Next Top Model-esque storyline following 5 candidates as they competed for the title. In addition to Dasha, I chose 4 girls Hef would consider for the coveted spot. Hope Dworasek, a brunette standout from the Dallas casting call, Jessica Burciaga, a petite Jennifer Lopez lookalike who I found on MySpace, Crystal McCahill, a curvy Chicago girl whose mother had been a playmate in the 60s, a connection Hef loved, and Carissa and Christina Shannon, blonde twins that I thought would make perfect TV drama. After spotting the Shannon twins' photos in a stack of Playmate test shots, I decided to research them a bit further. It still amazes me what some people are willing to put up online. Both Carissa and Christina's MySpace pages were riddled with the funniest posts imaginable. It's hard to explain without a visual aid, but just imagine 2 18-year-old girls posting the most over-the-top, wild, impressively illiterate entries. It was like something off the Maury Povich show or Jerry Springer. I couldn't tell if they were serious or not, but either way, they seemed like they might be the right kind of people to stir the pot. If they are anything like their posts, I said, laughing with Angel, who was standing over my shoulder as we were looking at their profile page, they'll make for great TV. The candidates were brought to Los Angeles that summer for their test shoots and invited to stay at the Bunny House. Our Girls Next Door production schedule was tight, so we had a quick turnaround and needed the girls nearby and available at a moment's notice. The shoots were going along right on schedule until I received word from Dasha that Jessica had left the Bunny House the night before her scheduled centerfold shoot at the studio. If she were MIA, we'd lose an entire day of shooting and waste thousands of dollars. No one had any idea where my runaway playmate had gone. We really need you to finish your pictorial, I reasoned with Jessica when I finally got her on the phone. We're on a tight schedule and every day costs money. It turned out that the runaway bunny went hopping back to Orange County. According to some of the crew and other girls staying at the house, Jessica had been tormented for days by the twins, along with Playboy's resident wild child, Laura Croft. While Carissa and Christina were surprisingly professional on set, they were apparently quite a handful after hours. Supposedly, the three girls tormented Jessica, calling her names, smearing shaving cream on her bedroom door, and relentlessly accusing her of sleeping with a Girls Next Door crew member. While these antics would have made for great TV, they were an example of the negativity Hef never wanted included in the final cut. So my efforts to include some spice in the mix by inviting the Shannon twins were wasted. "If you come back, you can stay in the mansion guest house away from the other girls," I told her, hoping this would quiet her frayed nerves. They'd done quite a number on the poor girl. After some coaxing, I finally got Jessica to agree. I asked Hazel, the office administrator, to put Jessica on the guest list in one of the 4 rooms in the mansion's guest house. After sorting out that potential disaster, I gave myself a well-deserved pat on the back. Crisis averted, I thought. When I arrived later that day to the Sunday night buffet, Hef was waiting for me in the dining room with a rabid look in his eyes. "What are you doing putting Jessica in the guest house?" he demanded, his voice quaking with anger. "She was having trouble with the other girls, so she left," I calmly explained to him, hoping he would recognize the volume of my voice and aim to match it. The dining room was filled with guests, and I didn't want to get lambasted in front of an audience. "I needed her here for work first thing tomorrow, so I put her in the guest house. I guess the twins were picking on her, so I thought this was an easy fix." "That is not your decision," Hef bellowed at me with no intent to try to keep this argument private. "Daddy's in charge of who stays where, not you." "But it's such a minor thing, I didn't even think you would want to be bothered with it," I said truthfully. I'd invited girls to stay with us before, and he never had a problem with it. I was completely caught off guard and could feel the tears start to burn in my eyes. I took a deep breath and held them back with every ounce of dignity I had left. Trying desperately to keep my voice from shaking, I continued, "You have more important things to worry about." "Well, this isn't your decision," he spat at me. By now, everyone was staring at us. "Daddy makes the rules." When I didn't respond, he turned to one of the guests and began jovial conversation as if nothing had happened. I looked down at my lap. I couldn't bear to make eye contact with anyone. I felt so humiliated. Despite his gentlemanly act, Hef had never been a progressive thinker when it came to women. I had always told myself that maybe I could change his attitude if he truly got to know me. It didn't look like that was ever going to happen. As we were getting ready for bed, Hef shuffled into my dressing area to inform me that our Girls Next Door shooting schedule for the next day had been postponed. Shit, I thought. After hustling to get Jessica back up here and getting the fear of God instilled in me for it, everything was being rescheduled. "Why?" I asked. "Something's come up with Kendra that they want to shoot instead," Hef managed, barely making eye contact with me. At that point, we all knew Kendra had one foot out the mansion gate and was in talks with E for her own spin-off series. The producers were starting to put scenes into place that would set up her eventual exit. Recently, Kendra and I had been getting along really well, but as I had a full-time, real job with actual responsibilities, I wasn't really thrilled to have to rearrange my work schedule for one of her last-minute whims. "We always have to move stuff for Kendra," I said, half joking, half hoping he would change the schedule back, while applying face lotion in the vanity mirror and mentally preparing to reorganize my entire work week. Hef stopped in his tracks and looked right at me. "Stop being such a fucking cunt!" he screamed, his face bloated and red with his hands clenched into fists. My mouth fell open in disbelief. In 7 years, I never once heard that word cross his lips. And now he wasn't just saying it, he was calling me it. His girlfriend, the supposed love of his life. I sat there staring at him in total shock, unable to move a muscle or even cry. After what felt like 30 long seconds of him glaring at me with his jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack his teeth, he stomped his foot like a child and scuffled back into the bedroom. Over the years, I dealt with a lot. The mean girls, the crazy rules, the irrational outbursts, and the repugnant bedroom routine. Because Hef so convincingly wore his gentleman Hef act at all other times, I was able to make excuses for him. But this was it. After being screamed at for no good reason twice in one day, I was freaked the hell out. There was no way I could fool myself into thinking Hef was a nice guy anymore. In that moment, I didn't care if I couldn't find someone to love me outside of the mansion because it was crystal clear no one on the inside loved me either. I needed to find someone to talk to, someone who could understand all the pressures I was under but wasn't trapped in the same bubble as I was. Maybe I could get some advice and a fresh perspective. I eventually decided on one of Hef's friends since he knew Hef well and certainly understood the degree to which I was bound to the show. I can't take it anymore, I confided to him 2 days later. I sat down with my chosen confidant to discuss what had been going on in my private life. I was already in the midst of filming season 5, but I felt like I couldn't keep up the charade another minute. Bridget had come in earlier and placed a box of Sprinkles cupcakes on the table. I cut myself a piece of one and passed the rest across the table. Just hang in there, he said, unwrapping the rest of the cupcake. He cares about you. He didn't mean it. He paused for another moment, sensing this wasn't giving me any comfort. Twisting his face into a thoughtful expression, he said, I'll try to find out what's bothering him. It doesn't matter if something's wrong, I said, trying to make sense of everything in my head. This is just who he is, and I'm realizing it for the first time. I sighed helplessly and put my head in my hands. My rope was rapidly fraying. He then went on to remind me that Bridget and Kendra were leaving soon and that Girls Next Door would be all about Hef, me, my work, and the girls that came through the studio. He honestly thought this would lift my spirits. I loved working on the show, but this wasn't about the show. This was my life. Thanks for listening, I said dismally. I believed what he had said about the show. Not only was Kendra on her way out of the mansion, but Bridget had recently been offered her dream job hosting a show for the Travel Channel, so her departure was inevitable as well. Audiences in E loved the episodes that focused on my work at the studio, and so did I. It seemed like all my dreams were coming true, but I had to ask myself, were those still my dreams? I was finally seeing Hef's true colors and accepting that perhaps he had been that way all along. Now the promise of having Hef, the mansion, and the show all to myself just sounded frightening. I didn't know what to do next. Despite the way he treated his girlfriends, I felt guilty even thinking about leaving Hef. I was constantly being reminded of how blessed I was and how grateful I should be. I didn't want to disappoint or let anyone down. What would his friends think? They'd always been so supportive of me because they saw that I treated Hef well. Would I lose my job? I loved my job and couldn't bear the thought of losing it. Maybe I could find some way to stay on as an employee? As all these questions were playing over and over in my head like a broken record, the time finally came to shoot the goodbye scene between me, Kendra, and Bridget. The scene was shot in Bridget's room, which was filled with suitcases and rolling racks full of clothes for the new travel show she was leaving to do. As I was the only part of the trio who was supposed to be staying at the mansion, I just plopped myself on Bridget's bed and waited for the others to talk. Most people who knew Holly from the Girls Next Door would have thought I'd be ecstatic to see Hef's 2 other girlfriends go, but in reality, I was on the verge of tears. The feeling hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't want to be here without Bridget and Kendra. At that moment, I knew it for a fact. I just didn't know how I was going to handle it. After more than 4 years together at the mansion, our little blonde army was disbanding. We had each evolved so much in that time. Like the freckle-faced producer had suggested years before, Kendra really did grow up inside the mansion, but it seemed to be due largely in part to a man she had met outside the mansion. For 8 months, Kendra had been secretly dating professional football player Hank Baskett and was madly in love. Gone was the insecure little girl who labeled Bridget and me the enemies and spent her days desperately jockeying for attention. In her place was a confident and gracious young woman. Bridget was off to host her own show. I couldn't think of a more perfect job for my best friend who was packing up to travel the world. When I first met her, all she had wanted to be was a playmate, and she ended up achieving so much more. The scene couldn't have been more genuinely emotional. I usually kept my feelings locked up far, far away from the cameras, but this time my tears flowed freely. It was in that moment that I realized how much these two women meant to me, and how only the three of us could ever know what this wild ride we had been on was truly like. It wasn't just the prospect of losing my two co-stars that made me feel so empty. I knew that even when I was the only girlfriend, there would always be visiting playmates and bunny house residents to keep me company. It was seeing these other two women evolve in just the way they should be evolving that made me realize that there was so much more out there for me, too. I didn't know what it was, but something had to feel more genuine and fulfilling than simply being the First Lady Stepford wife of the Playboy Mansion. After our teary hugs goodbye, the cameras stopped rolling and I slowly walked down the hall to the master bedroom's back door. My mind was reeling, my heart was hurting, and my stomach was tied in knots. What was I going to do now? I knew I'd be heading to Vegas in a few weeks to finish the last shoot for Jessica's pictorial. Maybe having some time away from the mansion, without the cameras following me, I'd actually have a chance to think. And Las Vegas seemed like a good place to clear my head. Chapter 11. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Lewis Carroll, Alice Through the Looking Glass. Thank you, Hef screamed so loud that my cell phone shook, for giving me the worst night of my life. Oh shit, I thought. We landed in Las Vegas early the previous morning for Jessica's Playmate shoot. I thought the Playboy Club at the Palms could be a playful backdrop consistent with the 55th anniversary theme. Knowing that the shoot would pull me out of Los Angeles for a day didn't hurt either. Jessica's shoot was scheduled over 2 days, and of course, per the curfew, I had planned on flying back and forth each day. Obviously, this would have been exhaustingly impractical, and given the state of mind I was in, I decided to just take a chance and try and stay over. I really needed the time to myself. I really should stay overnight, I told Hef. It doesn't make sense for me to fly all the way home, get only a few hours of sleep, then turn right back around and fly to Vegas the next morning. Given that my last attempt at spending an unchaperoned night away from the mansion for Tiffany Fallon's wedding hadn't gone over so well, I thought I was in for an uphill battle. Okay, darling, Hef said casually as a normal boyfriend should respond to such an innocent request. I'll miss you. My shoulders melted away from my ears. Sweet relief. I'll miss you too, I replied. A night alone, I thought, realizing I hadn't had a night truly to myself since I moved into the mansion 7 years earlier. After a full day on set, I was exhausted, but still exhilarated at the idea of spending some time by myself in Las Vegas without the watchful mansion eye hovering over me. I was pleasantly surprised with how easy the conversation went, especially given the recent tensions between us, but Hef had an extremely selective memory. I guess the verbal beating he gave me was just another forgettable moment for him. I desperately needed to get out that night and experience life as a normal 20-something before deciding if I was going to go back to Hef and settle down or break it off for good. I was like a bachelorette looking for her last hurrah or an Amish kid going out for rumspringa. The only problem was I didn't have anyone to hang out with. Jessica and the photo staff were wiped out from the day's shoot and all went to bed early. But more importantly, to make this night really matter, I needed to get away from Playboy people. The only friend I had in Las Vegas was Angel, but she was newly pregnant, so she was hardly up for a wild night on the town. I guess I could text Criss, I thought. It was a dangerous option, but a tempting one. Las Vegas magician Criss Angel had been jumping onto my radar for a while at that point. Bridget, Kendra, and I had been guest judges on a reality competition series he had been featured on. We met briefly backstage, and he tossed some awkward pickup lines my way. Because I was one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends, guys didn't usually have the gall to hit on me that blatantly, so I found his fumbled attempts strangely endearing, like a teenage boy tripping over his own feet. I remember thinking he was attractive. His style was reminiscent of the hair rockers from the 80s that I thought were cute when I was a kid. He kind of looked like a poor man's Tommy Lee. I didn't really think twice about his flirting until after the taping, when Chris's people contacted the Playboy publicity office to invite Bridget, Kendra, and me out to a club in Los Angeles. He was a notorious publicity fueled womanizer. An A-list actress, a former child star, a famous heiress, and a post mental breakdown pop princess were among his many conquests. No way! I laughed into the phone line when Sally from publicity called me. Is he crazy? We're Hef's girlfriends. I know, Sally giggled. I just had to let you know. I wasn't entirely sure which one of us he was after, but I couldn't help but be flattered. He knew our position at the mansion and wanted to take the chance anyway. Not long after our initial meeting, we were invited to be guests on yet another Criss Angel television series, Mind Freak. Unlike the talent competition series, Mind Freak centered on Chris's day-to-day life as a street magician. Bridget and I accepted the offer and flew to Las Vegas for the day with a representative from Playboy PR, aka a chaperone. It was fun watching him on set. Unlike us, he had a say in what went on in front of the cameras, as well as a producer role, which I found fascinating. Despite his mysterious on-camera persona, behind the scenes he was an easygoing jokester. In between setups, he invited us to join him and his usual entourage at his residence suite at the Luxor Hotel. His friends referred to it as the compound behind his back. I was charmed by the things that littered his suite: video games, a foosball table, and an intricate model train set. I wasn't so charmed by the cheap plastic dry erase board stuck to the back of his front door with the words, "Brittany was here, Spears," sprawled across the center in a drunken, out-of-order scrawl. We get it, I thought, laughing to myself. You banged Britney Spears. It was all sort of obnoxious, but truth, it made me like him even more. I was so conditioned to the geriatric way of life at the mansion that Chris's boyish hobbies seemed so different and refreshing to me. Though I had more in common with Hef, I was so oversaturated with his life and style at that point that I probably would have found any hobby besides dominoes attractive. We shot our final scene at LAX nightclub inside the Luxor. Bridget and I were escorted to a large booth already populated with pretty girls. Producers sat me next to a petite, sexy brunette with sparkly, high-gloss lips. "This is Monica," Criss said as he introduced us. "She's the main boxing ring girl." "Nice to meet you guys," she managed through a false smile. "I just love Kendra. She's the whole reason I like your show." Wow, subtle, I thought. It seemed to me that Monica was Chris's flavor of the night. With puppy dog eyes, she had followed his every movement as he performed, and as she watched him, he was clearly watching me. "To true love," Criss toasted as he held up his shot glass filled with a sugary Washington apple shot, somehow managing to split his gaze between Monica and myself. It was a lame move to try to flirt with both of us at the same time, but it just made me laugh. After all, I thought he was cute, but I wasn't going to date him, so I didn't waste my time feeling insulted. I could tell Monica definitely thought something was up, though. Since we already had secured the bachelorette suite at the Palms, a 2,300 square foot pink paradise, since rebranded as the Hot Pink Suite, for part of Jessica's shoot, I decided I should crash there for the night. Criss responded almost immediately to my text, saying he'd love to grab dinner with me after his rehearsals. He suggested 9, the steakhouse at the Palms. Yeah, right, I thought. Criss and I were just friends, but the last thing I needed was a picture popping up online of the two of us having a romantic dinner together, or however the press might spin it. The massive suite had a fully decked out dining room, so I suggested that he come over and we order room service. In between shoveling pieces of steak and plain baked potato in his mouth, Criss rattled on about how he had to eat healthy because he was practically naked in his new show. Again, his thinly veiled attempts at baiting me couldn't have been more transparent, but I was slowly becoming more and more charmed by him. I mean, I hadn't flirted with a guy my own age since I was 21. Actually, Criss was 11 years older than me, but compared to Hef, he felt like a contemporary. After years of believing no guy would ever want Hugh Hefner's mistress, I was surprised that he actually seemed really into me. After all, he dropped whatever plans he might have had on a moment's notice to hang out. Well, I gotta see that, I joked, taking the obvious bait. Unlike the ultra-feminine, docile fembot I was required to be as one of Hef's girlfriends, with Criss I felt like I could be one of the guys. It was a refreshing change of pace. Criss asked me what I wanted to do next, his thick Long Island accent coating every syllable as he examined his teeth in the reflection of his steak knife. Take me out, I demanded playfully. I had one night away from the mansion and I didn't want to squander it sitting up in the hotel room, but we had to be careful. I don't know the city at all outside the Palms. I just need to go somewhere low key, I explained. Hef has really strict rules when it comes to us, so I really can't be seen with a guy in public. It sucks, but I trailed off and shrugged my shoulders. Criss didn't miss a beat. He immediately suggested Cat House, which he described as really low key, jumping at the opportunity to spend more time with me. Great, I said, popping out of my chair. I had no idea what this place was, but I was eager to get out of the hotel room. If it was low key, it worked for me. Let me grab my purse. I bounded into the bedroom to snatch my bag and check my makeup. Looking at myself in the reflection, I couldn't help but notice the big smile involuntarily plastered on my face. Maybe this is exactly what I needed, I thought. Just one night out. Maybe all of Hef's restrictions are just making me crazy and I'll feel better about him tomorrow. Of course, Hef would be irate if he knew I was headed out for a night on the town with another man, but what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Nothing was going to happen between Criss and me. Plus, paparazzi didn't really exist in Las Vegas. Not like they did in LA at any rate. With all the strict gaming laws in Nevada, photographers couldn't be snapping away inside a casino. As long as we were discreet, I'd be fine. The nightclub was small, dark, and intimate. Situated inside the Luxor, the boutique nightclub did feel surprisingly private, and I allowed myself to relax. Criss asked if I would take a picture with the Cat House girls when a posse of uniformed women arrived at our table. No harm in taking a photo with a couple of dancers, I thought. Cat House was a restaurant as well as a nightclub, so I didn't think the photo could be that incriminating should it get out. Criss and I sat in a corner booth, ordered 2 glasses of red wine, and talked over the loud music for hours. We spoke about my relationship with Hef and how stifling it was. He confided in me that he started dating an 18-year-old girl who moved into his hotel suite and won't move out, as he put it. He told me he made a mistake getting together with her and was planning on breaking it off in the nicest way possible. The fact that he was dating someone 22 years younger than him, not to mention barely legal, grossed me out since it reminded me so much of the Hefner situation. However, Criss seemed so sincere when he told me that he felt like he'd made a mistake and was looking for someone different that I was willing to overlook the impression his dating situation had made on me. We talked a lot about his new show and the pressures he was under. After we ran out of things to say, he started laying it on unbelievably thick. You know, Criss began, going into a bumbling speech about how he was looking for someone to have fun with, but to have a serious relationship, he was quick to add after he noticed the look on my face. I sat there quietly and let him continue as he stumbled all over his words while trying to share his feelings with me. I took his nervousness as a compliment. He seemed to be smitten with me. He continued on about how he had worked for 15 years to have his own live show and how it was finally becoming a reality. Between his TV show Mind Freak, which was in its 4th season at the time, and his over-the-top public performances, like being shackled underwater for 24 hours in Times Square, Criss was, at the time, one of the most well-known magicians in the world. He seemed so happy about the direction his life was going, telling me that things had been really crazy in the past, but now he could finally have a routine. He was locked into a major contract for the next 10 years and asked me if I knew how much he would be fined if he missed the single show. I shook my head as the new direction of the conversation reflected his more aggressive tone. He told me he would be fined $200,000. Criss was constantly peacocking around in diamonds and Rolls Royces, bragging about his salary and never letting anyone forget how much he was worth. To be honest, I found it a little tacky. But at the end of the day, I didn't care. I have no idea if that number he threw out was real or just his way of trying to impress me. At the time, I was just flattered that anyone cared about impressing me, period. He softened his voice again and went on to say that he had 2 days off a week and that he needed someone who could plan fun things for him to do on his day off, someone who he could do those things with. It wasn't the most romantic advance ever made, but I couldn't help but be intrigued. Here was this adventurous guy, so full of life, who was looking for someone to be young and wild with. He blurted out that he'd marry me right now when I didn't take the bait. I nearly spat out my drink. Was this guy serious? While he was laying it on so thick, I found him playful and entertaining, and he was clearly dead set on making something happen between us. For publicity, I said, calling him out on what I presumed was bullshit. To be fair, I knew that Criss was used to women shamelessly throwing themselves at him, so I figured he didn't quite appreciate that I was simply interested in the novelty of hanging out with a guy who was closer to my own age for the night. No, he shot back, feigning shock at the suggestion. What I mean is, he began his spiel, one that I would come to know by heart, how he was ready for family and for marriage, how hard he worked for 15 years to obtain success, how he had been almost a train wreck, referring to his slutty behavior, which he loved to remind me of, as if it were going to make me jealous or somehow grateful, and how he was locked into the routine of his new show, Believe. While I spent much of the evening at Cat House rolling my eyes, I also had a hard time containing my smile. Sure, Criss was a well known player and he was coming on strong, but something about his story made sense. Maybe he was at a point where he was ready for a committed relationship. He was 40 years old and making some huge changes in his life, so it was possible. On the other hand, we had only just met, so the whole conversation seemed absurd. But it was fun for me to get swept away in the idea that he was so into me. It was something I needed to feel after years of Hef making me feel like a piece of dirt. And who cared if he was serious or not? I wasn't going to get with this guy anyway. The most important part of the night for me was that in the span of one evening, he had single-handedly crushed one of my biggest fears about leaving the mansion. Perhaps I wasn't damaged goods after all. In fact, in Criss's eyes, I was quite desirable. After a few glasses of wine, Criss gave me a tour of the Luxor Theater and then accompanied me back to the Palms and walked me back to my suite. He invited himself into my room, offering to tuck me in. Okay, I giggled, knowing the cheesy line would get him through the door, but it wouldn't get him any further. After all, I wasn't that drunk. I stumbled towards the large pink bed, jumped in fully clothed, and pulled the comforter up to my chin. As he stood over the bed and leaned in to kiss me, I erupted into a fit of laughter and turned my head away from him. I can't, I playfully reminded him. Remember? He sighed, standing back up. He reached down and removed my earrings from each ear and set them by the bedside table. He whispered sweet dreams softly into my ear. After walking across the room, he scrawled something on the back page of a room service menu, a note reading "I miss you," tearing out the sheet and sticking it next to my curling iron on the bathroom counter. Sweet dreams, I mumbled, immediately drifting off into a peaceful sleep as he exited the suite. When I woke the next morning to my buzzing cell phone, the last thing I expected to hear was a ferociously angry Hef. "Thank you," Hef screamed so loud that my cell phone shook, "for giving me the worst night of my life." "What are you talking about?" I asked Hef defensively. Honestly, I had endured so many verbal lashings lately that I had no idea what could have possibly been the catalyst for this outburst. After getting permission to stay over the night before, I had called him again shortly before his 10 p.m. bedtime to wish him good night. We traded I love yous, and that was it. Sure, I hadn't offered up my dinner and clubbing plans for later that evening because I knew he would never allow it. "I didn't hear anything from you last night," he continued, screaming into the receiver. "I was up all night, sick with worry." "But I called you right before you went to bed," I tried rationalizing with him. "I don't understand what you're talking about. I had my cell phone with me all night," I kept rattling off before realizing he had to know something. "Why were you up?" I asked. "Security told me," he spat. "You had a guy in your room last night." I paused for a moment, waiting for this information to sink in. Holy shit, I thought. He actually had me followed. Nothing happened, I said firmly and sternly. I had a few drinks and a friend walked me in to make sure I got into bed okay. That's it. And it was. Sure, there was some definite flirting and perhaps some blurred lines on his part, but I hadn't done a damn thing. I'd never cheated on Hef. He had slept with an army of different women during our time together, but I remained faithful. Despite all my insecurities and regardless of how desperate I was to have one night out, in my mind I was still in a relationship, and I was nothing if not loyal. Whoever was trailing me around Vegas apparently didn't relay to Hef just how quickly Criss exited my suite. Oh, yeah? Hef asked mockingly. Well, we'll talk about it when you get home. Thank you, he repeated in dramatic Hef fashion, for giving me the worst night of my life. I pulled the phone away from my ear and waited for the line to disconnect. I was equal parts stunned and seething. How dare he have me followed, I thought. For 7 ridiculous years, I remained entirely faithful to this man. Even if my evening did include some temptations, I had conducted myself like a good girlfriend. I wouldn't even kiss Criss when we were alone in a hotel room in a moment I thought would forever remain private. I knew Hef well enough to know that in his head, I was already categorized as a cheater. I might as well slap a big scarlet A on my chest because he would never let me live this down, even though there was nothing to actually live down. I was sure that for the rest of our relationship, he would call upon this incident every time he didn't get his way and use it as leverage. I could kiss goodbye any chance of spending another night away from the mansion again. One of Hef's favorite stories to call upon during press interviews is how, in his pre-Playboy days, his first wife, Mildred Williams, cheated on him during their engagement. When his then fiancée confessed to being unfaithful, he was devastated but chose to marry her anyway. Of course, the marriage ended, but I always felt he used this incident as a way to justify his philandering behavior and to gain sympathy from the public. It was as if he was saying, sure, I'm a womanizer, but my ex-wife made me that way. She did this to me. In fact, he seemed to have a penchant for cheaters. After all, he did crave drama. His second wife was rumored to have been unfaithful with a member of the mansion staff, and his third wife ran out on their first planned wedding to be with just one of the several men she had allegedly cheated on Hef with. It would never change, I thought. Hef would never change. If I stay, this would be my life. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay. I wouldn't stay. I was finally done. Returning home from Las Vegas felt as awkward as you could possibly imagine. I was determined to make my exit as quickly as possible, but Hef kept putting off having too much of a serious conversation about it. He pleaded with me to stay despite hurting him, but I just gave him the cold shoulder. It seemed he felt that if he could somehow stall and put off my leaving as long as possible, that I would just forget about wanting to leave and everything would go back to normal, save for the giant imaginary albatross he had to hang over my head. He could sense something inside me had shifted and was waiting for it to shift back. I wouldn't allow him to manipulate me anymore. I had to make it clear to Hef that I was leaving. Over the course of our relationship, I'd only ever initiated a serious conversation with Hef once, maybe twice. The morning after returning home from Las Vegas, I stopped by Mary's office before heading out for the day to tell her I needed to talk to Hef as soon as possible. I felt that if I could get Hef on the phone, I could say what I needed to say without him trying to throw me off course, pull at my heartstrings, or lay on the guilt, as I was sure he would be successful at doing if we tried to talk face to face. Hey, honey, Mary said a bit cautiously when she called a few hours later. For months she'd seen the warning signs and knew what was coming. Hef's on the line. Before I could say a word, I heard Hef speak weakly into the receiver. Mary says you have something you'd like to talk to me about. Yes, I said, feeling instantly small and incredibly nervous. I took a determined breath and continued. I've decided I can't stay any longer. My feelings aren't there anymore and I don't want to fake it. I need to make a life for myself and have a family. It felt like a full minute had passed before Hef spoke. Are you sure? He finally asked, continuing to dangle the bait that E had ordered a sixth season of the show. If I wouldn't stay for him, he assumed I would at least stay for the show. It seemed as if he thought all a woman could possibly want was fame and money. I didn't say anything. My mind was made up. He pleaded with me to stay, to not tell anyone we broke up, to try and work it out. I need my freedom, I tried to explain. I want to be able to actually hang out with my girlfriends and have fun like a normal person. Ha! He exclaimed through a sarcastic chuckle. What makes you think any of those girls will want to hang out with you if you aren't my girlfriend? After years of being conditioned to believe that I wasn't anything without Playboy attached to my name, I had actually started to believe it. But I knew better now. His frantic attempts to keep me chained to the mansion seemed transparent, desperate, and just made me angry. I'm sorry, I said softly but firmly. I wouldn't be manipulated, not this time. And since I clearly wasn't responding to his spiteful attempts to cripple my self-confidence, he tried playing the guilt card, asking me if I wanted him to have another stroke and saying that if he died, it would be my fault. He wasn't above using his age and health as a tactic to get his way. Over the years, in a few of our more heated disagreements, he regularly made dramatic statements along these lines to get me to drop an argument. It was ridiculous considering that our disagreements, up to this point, had always been about things that should have been trivial to him. But for him, it was all about winning. He didn't care if I stayed out of fear or out of pity, as long as I stayed, but I wasn't going to budge. I sat silently on the other end of the phone line, patiently waiting for this episode to pass. After gaining some self-confidence and a bit of perspective, it was clear just how tired his routine had become. It's like I was seeing him with new eyes. He was no longer this infallible icon I created in my mind. He was just a spoiled child in an old man's body. I have to go, I said. That's final. Silence. Okay, darling, he managed, his voice choking up, sincerely for a change. But I hope you will reconsider. Hef was in denial about our breakup for a long time. He chalked it up to some kind of phase I was going through. After giving him the worst night of his life, he began pursuing me like never before. All of a sudden, I mattered. The entire concept for season 6 of Girls Next Door was to follow Hef and me as we trotted off into Foreverland, just the two of us. To everyone on the outside, it appeared as though my wish was finally being granted. Mr. Playboy all to myself. But it was too late. The switch had been flipped. It wasn't one thing in particular, but more a cocktail of the last few months. His verbal lashings, my newfound confidence as a career woman, and the affirmations of another man all allowed me to see that the fears I'd been living under for 7 years were just smoke and mirrors. Now, the thought of living with the unfounded cheater moniker was just too much to take. I couldn't stay any longer. After a meeting in Mary's office, Hef and I decided that I would move down the hall into bedroom 5 while I finished shooting my final Girls Next Door scenes. Most of season 5 was already in the can when I met up with Criss that night in Vegas, but there was still more to do. It came as a shock to most of the staff and show producers when I actually began the process of moving out of the master suite. None of my packing was captured on the show. Hef and the producers were still hoping I would change my mind about moving out and that I would be back as Hef's girlfriend by the time cameras started rolling for season 6. I had done a good job of acting like a blissfully happy girlfriend. Only the closest of confidants had known about my unhappiness. It was oddly nostalgic to be moving back into the same room I had moved into as a mansion newbie 7 years prior. Back then, I barely had a suitcase full of possessions. Now I had substantially more to pack. I had a large storage closet full of clothing, mementos, and Christmas decorations in the mansion's basement, not to mention another one in the bunny house across the street. Needless to say, this move was going to take a bit more time. As I packed up the vanity in the master bedroom, I labeled each box with a Sharpie listing the contents. One evening after work, I was making trips from Hef's bedroom to my old room down the hall. I noticed one box had been scribbled on in writing other than my own. In his distinctive handwriting, it read, Hef's heart. In that instant, my own heart sank. Despite everything he'd done to me, I didn't enjoy hurting him. But that wasn't going to stop me. I knew Hef wasn't in love with me. He was in love with the idea of being in love. He was in love with the routine and the convenience of our relationship. I wasn't interested in settling anymore. I was looking for my happily ever after. During my final weeks in the mansion, Hef waffled between doting on me and punishing me. If I ever seemed to be in too good of spirits, he would do his best to smack me back down with snide comments or attempts to make me jealous by toting around the Shannon twins. I couldn't have cared less. In fact, I wanted him to move on. It would have taken some of the pressure off of me. I was beginning to realize that he preferred miserable and uninspired Holly, maybe because she was easier to control. I buried myself in work. For the time being, I was allowed to keep my job at Studio West. While I had hoped it was because of my contribution and the experience I had gained over the last 2 years, I realized that Hef's team most likely advised him to keep me on staff to avoid any kind of lawsuit or wrongful termination accusations. Still, while Hef had begun the process of moving on, he hadn't lost hope that I would reconsider and move back into his master suite. Anytime I would run into Hef in the mansion hallway, it was painfully awkward. "I'll have the rest of my stuff out of your room by tomorrow," I told him during one such encounter. He assured me I could take my time and there was no hurry, but I was anxious to get my stuff out ASAP. The next day, while Hef was working in his office, I went into the master suite for my last round of packing. When I went to grab my things from a shelf near the bed, I noticed one of Hef's file folders sitting neatly in the middle of what was formerly my side of the bed. That's weird, I thought. Hef never leaves important documents lying around. They're always locked up in his bedroom safe, his office, or being hand carried by him personally. He was a man of routine, and this was entirely out of character. Curious, I picked up the stack of papers, which were obviously left for me to see. Inside was a copy of his last will and testament. I spent 7 years living with this man, so I can tell you on good authority that he would have never left something this important lying around by accident. It was clear to me that this was meant for me to see. It carefully outlined the division of his estate. After death tax, his fortunes would be divvied up starting with roughly 50% to his charitable foundation, and the bulk of the remainder divided evenly between his 4 children, Christy, David, Marston, and Cooper. No surprise there. What came next was shocking to me. For the better part of a decade, Hef used money as a means to control each girlfriend. Anything he shared was temporary, a weekly allowance, monthly payments for leased cars, etc. At a moment's notice, he had the ability to pull the rug out from under us. But it was there in black and white. The will stated that $3 million would be bestowed to Holly Madison at the time of his death, provided I still lived at the mansion. At the time, it was more money than I'd ever know what to do with. We'd never spoken about his will, and I never expected anything like that. In the past, he had casually mentioned leaving me the bunny house, but I never took the bait. Disgusted by the gold digger image the public had of me, I tried to stay away from those kinds of cliches as much as possible in my real life. I still held on to a shred of hope that I would one day be financially independent. I had saved enough of my girls next door's salary to put a down payment on a Santa Monica condo I hoped to rent out. And once I had started making some money, I stopped accepting the clothing allowance that made me feel so cheap. Eventually, I would go on to find my own success, but I didn't know it back then. My future was a gamble. Despite spending 7 years in one of the most expensive homes in Los Angeles, living a relatively lavish lifestyle, I had no wealth of my own, just the illusion of it. $3 million was a lot of money to me, but I didn't want it. I actually pitied him for stooping to that level. I couldn't help being offended. Did he really think he could buy me? I put the folder back on the bed just as I had found it and never breathed a word of it. During one of our final encounters at the mansion, Hef spotted me as he shuffled down the hallway. "You're not wearing your bunny necklace," he said, a sorrowful look plaguing his eyes. I didn't know what to say. I was only glad he didn't know that I had already started the process of removing my bunny tattoo as well. "No one," he said, pausing for emphasis, will ever love you as much as I do. He enunciated the sentence slowly as if he were making a grand speech. I had no words. Instead, I gave him a friendly hug in order to avoid actually speaking to him. I know he was trying to sound romantic, as if he were pledging his undying love, but to me his comment sounded like a slight. I knew I deserved better, and there's no way his kind of love was the best the world had to offer. Through his vain attempts to intimidate, guilt, persuade, and eventually bribe me, the only thing he succeeded in doing was to convince me that I was making the best decision I had made in a very long time. During those final few months, I began spending more time in Las Vegas. It was a town brimming with opportunities. I met with the producers of the Crazy Horse Paris, a tasteful cabaret show at the MGM Grand. We had discussed me doing a guest run before, but now I was ready to pursue it. Bridget and I were hired to host a Halloween party in Vegas and were brought out early to shoot flyers for the event. And while my trips were primarily business focused, I was finally single and free to date whomever I wanted, so I found myself seeing Criss in my spare time. Though I was cautious to take it slow at first, over time it was clear he really was looking for something serious and our relationship grew romantic. When I announced to him that I was leaving Hef in the mansion, Criss opened up his world to me without even a moment's hesitation. He pleaded with me to move in with him by Halloween during one of my trips to Las Vegas. No, I giggled. That's too soon. I didn't want to rush into a relationship too fast. Honestly, I didn't see myself settling down with him quickly. I had big plans, none of which involved living with a man. I hoped to split my time between LA and Las Vegas in order to balance both my job at Studio West as well as performing regularly at the MGM. I had hopes of developing my own spin off TV series chronicling my new life in Vegas as a single showgirl. Unfortunately, my need to feel loved would win out over my need for independence. During my last few weeks at the mansion, Bridget was back on a break from filming her travel show. After we discussed the upcoming Halloween party, I had to fill her in on how awkward things continued to be for me under Hef's roof. Hef came into my room the other day and tried reasoning with me, I told Bridget, sprawling myself out on her large round bed. He was trying to talk me out of dating Criss and was like, the media calls him a douchebag. I didn't know what to say. Despite everything, Hef hadn't quite given up yet. A few weeks after that fateful night in Las Vegas, photos emerged revealing what appeared to be an intimate evening I spent with Criss Angel in Las Vegas. I remained at the mansion for about 2 months total after Hef and I officially broke up, in order to fulfill my obligations to the TV series. During those 8 weeks, as I waited around to see what sort of final scenes I needed to film for season 5, more details began to not so mysteriously emerge in the press about my relationship with Criss. For being an illusionist, he sure was obvious. The media was having a field day with the idea that all 3 of Hef's girlfriends were simultaneously leaving the mansion for other men. Though Bridget hadn't gotten involved with anyone yet, the media jumped on any sighting of her with another guy, hoping to round out the story of Kendra and Hank and me and Criss. One tabloid article in particular erroneously linked Bridget to a Las Vegas DJ. Since that same article went out of its way to mention that I was whisked away in Chris's black Rolls-Royce Phantom, I couldn't help but think he was behind that article too. Yeah, he talked to me about it too, Bridget said. He thinks dating Criss will be bad for your career. Was I seriously going to get career advice from a man who spent 7 years treating me like a glorified pet? I told him a long time ago that I knew you were really depressed, Bridget continued, and that's why you didn't go to that Lakers game a while ago. Months before our breakup and my fateful trip to Las Vegas, Hef, the girls, and I had plans to attend a Lakers game. Slowly, I attempted to get ready, but couldn't gather up the strength to finish my hair and makeup. Like a zombie, I walked back to our bed and tucked myself in for the night. Have you ever been so depressed that it's a struggle just to leave your room? By then, I had weaned myself off the antidepressants I had been prescribed back when Girls Next Door first started filming. Between the success of the series and my new career, I had established some much needed self confidence and even found some happiness in my day to day routine. But in moments of weakness, the depression kept creeping back in. It forced me to realize that it wasn't just in my head. It had to be this lifestyle that was draining me. I told him he should really talk to you about it, Bridget offered. Well, he never did, I said. If I had any doubts about my decision to leave, what Bridget had said just squashed them. Hef knew how desperate, sad, and broken I was, but didn't do a damn thing about it. I'd given 7 years of my life to a man who couldn't even have a conversation with me. Kendra's and my final scenes with Hef were a bit less authentic than the goodbye scene the three of us girls had filmed a few weeks earlier. Ever concerned with public perception, Hef had to ensure that the breakups painted him in the most positive light possible. He couldn't seem heartless, but he couldn't appear devastated by our departures either. It was a delicate balance to strike, especially since it was a total farce. When Kendra walks into Hef's bedroom to reveal to him that she's decided to leave the mansion, viewers can clearly see framed photos of Carissa and Christina Shannon, who moved in as girlfriends in October 2008, scattered around the bed, having already replaced the photos of the three of us. Hef didn't start dating the Shannon twins until after Bridget, Kendra, and I had all announced our departures, so the framed photos posed a continuity flaw that the three of us girls noticed right away when we viewed the episode. The producers either didn't notice it or didn't care. In fact, it worked out for them quite nicely, because in order to make Hef look like the playboy he wanted to be portrayed as, it was important that him dating the Shannon twins be worked into Girls Next Door's 5th season before Bridget, Kendra, and I left. After all, how could the great Hugh Hefner ever be single, even for one day? The twins are shown moving into the mansion in the same episode we learned to scuba dive and before we shot our final pictorials. It worked nicely for them because when Hef came to see us scuba dive in the ocean, he brought a gaggle of playmates with him, including the Shannon twins, who were shooting their playmate pictorial. But the twins were never predatory, never trying to steal anyone's boyfriend. They didn't move in until after the three of us had all broken it off with Hef, despite what he would like viewers to think. When it was finally my turn to film a goodbye scene, producers asked me to film a short segment with Hef where I tell him I'd be heading to Las Vegas to work on a pictorial. It was intended to be my last scene. It felt so forced and inauthentic. The producers always knew how to leave a scene open-ended if need be. If I were to truly leave Hef forever, as I said I was going to, they had an exit scene for me. By asking me to refer to the photo shoot in Vegas, I suppose they intended that to be where I met Criss. If I changed my mind and came back before the next season began filming, as they hoped I would, the scene would be played off as a temporary departure. In a moment of rebelliousness, I decided to wear a Criss Angel logo hoodie, a blatant flaw in the continuity of the series. The show was setting it up as if I were on my way to meet Criss for the first time, but in reality, that wasn't the case. It was my way of alerting savvy viewers that it was all for show. If I met Criss during that photo shoot in Vegas, why was I already wearing his hoodie? I thought someday someone might notice and realize that our relationship unraveled much differently than they portrayed it on television. Since the crew didn't notice the jacket, no one asked me to remove it. The mansion's annual Halloween bash, the Saturday before the actual holiday, was my final hurrah before heading off to the Santa Monica condo I'd recently purchased and eventually to Las Vegas and Criss. After years of being seated next to Hef at these soirees like a perfect little soldier, I was eager to finally let loose. As a nod to my new Vegas obsession, I decided to go as Elvis and immediately buddied up with John Stamos, who was also dressed as Elvis, and his then girlfriend as Priscilla, naturally. And together we all braved the mansion's elaborate haunted house. The two were friendly and down to earth, a nice contrast to the overall feel of this particular party. As I looked around, I realized that the mansion wasn't quite the same magical place it had been when I first arrived. Like Dorothy, I peeked behind the curtain and saw the frail old man pretending to be someone he wasn't. The mystique had vanished. But it wasn't just my perception that had changed. Just a few months earlier, the ailing financial state of Playboy Enterprises prompted them to begin selling tickets to the once exclusive soirees. The guest list ballooned to accommodate the increasing demand, and the vibe became crowded and hectic. The new guest list was less exclusive in every way, and a frantic, touristy vibe took over the parties. It was easy to get separated from your friends because it was so crowded, and the overwhelming influx of newbies hungry to snap photos of every guest and every detail of the party totally changed the entire feel. By 2008, everyone had a smartphone, and the no camera rule that used to be what kept the parties a private and exclusive haven for celebrities was obliterated. Since by that time I had found a bit of TV fame, I spent much of the night taking photos with guests. The slow, sexy elegance of the first Playboy party I had attended back in 2000 had completely vanished. So much for what happens in the grotto stays in the grotto, I thought. I decided then and there that the Halloween party was the last mansion party I ever needed to attend. And it was. Meanwhile, as I was contemplating how much things had changed, somewhere across the property that very night, history was repeating itself, and someone else was seeing the mansion through new eyes. While Christina and Carissa Shannon spent the evening stuck at Hef's side, itching for more freedom, someone else was standing outside Hef's roped-off area looking in. I imagine the twins didn't want the responsibilities of being the main girlfriend, so they had their eyes open for a girl to fill that spot. And it was there that they spotted her, standing just a few feet away from their table, boiling over with nerves at the thought of meeting Gatsby himself. Just as I had been 7 years earlier, Crystal Harris was 22, thin, blonde, a bit plain, and somewhat shy. How could she ever outshine those gorgeous, vibrant Shannon twins? They had no idea that night that she would be their eventual undoing. While someone else was thrilled at the prospect of getting into the inner circle of the Playboy world, I couldn't have been happier to be getting out. The Playboy Mansion certainly changed my life, for better and for worse. It had been both my safe haven and my prison. Living inside those hulking walls hadn't been the path to fame and fortune that I had imagined, and it certainly hadn't been my path to love. I was grateful for all I had gained there, but still mourned all that was lost. As I drove out of those daunting gates, I never once looked back. Chapter 12. "She's my prisoner, you know," the Red Knight said at last. "I don't know," Alice said doubtfully. "I don't want to be anyone's prisoner. I want to be a queen." Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass. Criss was desperate to have me in Las Vegas for the premiere of his show Believe on Halloween night. After fulfilling my final scheduled obligation to Playboy, in New York with Bridget and Kendra to promote a recently developed Playboy perfume, just don't call it Girls Next Door, I jetted off to Sin City to walk the black carpet with my new boyfriend. Seduced by this good-looking man who was seemingly frantic in his affections for me, I allowed myself to be lured in. After knowing each other only a few months, he needed me by his side for the world premiere of his new show. I was the one who calmed his nerves, he said. I had become so used to taking a back seat to Hef and sharing the remaining spotlight with other women, I was beyond flattered that this successful man was so enthralled with me, and only me. Believe had utterly bombed during press previews. Critics were merciless in their dismembering of his performance. The Las Vegas Sun ruthlessly called Criss a charmless mook and a rudimentary stage performer. He's barely believable playing himself. It didn't stop there. The writer went on to say, "The single most amazing thing about Believe is that it is still so boring." Ouch. No wonder he was nervous. I felt sorry for the guy. And, like a magician does when wanting to guide the audience's attention away from a trick, he needed to provide a distraction, or in magician's term, a misdirection, for the media the night of the show's opening. That night, unbeknownst to me, I was the misdirection. On the night of his premiere, Criss introduced the world to his splashy new romance, the flashy blonde he had seemingly stolen from right under Hugh Hefner's nose. We paraded down the press line hand in hand, before pausing in front of photographers so Criss could plant a big wet kiss on me. Wow, I thought, giddy with the excitement of my new romance. He really wants to show me off. It wouldn't take long before the illusion started to dissolve. True to his word, Criss spent his days off toting me around Las Vegas. Like a normal young couple, we'd spend afternoons four-wheeling out in the desert or going to pool parties, and our evenings eating at the finest restaurants and catching some of the Strip's most acclaimed shows. The two of us didn't really have that much in common, but I was so thrilled to be able to go out and try new things that I didn't notice or care. We were quickly becoming the most buzzed about couple in Las Vegas. I have to admit, it was nice to be recognized as someone independent of Hef. Sure, people still thought of me as a Playboy bunny, but I had separated from Hef and was still not only relevant but thriving, things he told me that I wouldn't be without him. My name was topping search engine lists regularly, and I was being written about in gossip blogs. I had never received that kind of attention when I was with Hef. With all the excitement swirling around me, it was easy to go along for the ride. Not long into our courtship, Criss bought me a piece of jewelry, a small diamond cross necklace. Conveniently, a photo of us at the jewelry store popped up on a few gossip sites, most of which speculated that we must be engagement ring shopping. With a 10-year Vegas residency on the horizon, Criss was in the market to purchase his first home and insisted on me coming along to all the showings. He wanted me to love what he insisted would be our future home. As we'd stroll through these sprawling Vegas estates, he'd ask my opinions on this feature or that fixture, seeming interested in what I had to say. On the days I would travel back to Los Angeles to work on my Playboy job that I had somehow managed to hang on to, I'd come home to a huge bouquet of red roses already waiting for me at my Santa Monica condo. Criss didn't waste a single opportunity to continue impressing me. He would text me often throughout the day, wanting to know what I was up to, getting worked up when he couldn't get a hold of me. After a few trips back to the coast, Criss began insisting that one of his security guards accompany me. As our public profile continued to rise, Criss said it was in order to keep me safe. The guard would stay in a hotel near my condo and was to accompany me everywhere. It was awkward and embarrassing to have to explain to my friends why a security guard joined us for every meal. "Doesn't that seem a little unnecessary?" one friend suggested over our lunch. "Maybe a bit possessive?" "No," I said, trying to hide my embarrassment. Criss worshipped the ground I walked on and genuinely worried about me, I thought. "He's just protective," I explained. In my post-mansion life, Criss seemed to be exactly what I needed. It wasn't long before I reverted back into the Converse-wearing, jeans, ponytail, and black nail polish kind of girl that I used to be in high school. No longer feeling the pressure to look and act like a human Barbie doll was a gigantic weight off my shoulders. In fact, Criss even encouraged me to go without makeup. Wow, somebody who likes me for who I really am, I thought. Despite having made a complete break from my relationship with Hef, I still felt like I was awkwardly darting back and forth between two worlds. Not only was there my job at the Playboy studio, but there were still girls next door obligations to fill. I had only been with Criss for about 6 weeks or so when I received a call from the Girls Next Door producers asking me to come into the studio for audio commentary for the Season 5 DVD. Understandably, now that the season was wrapped and edited, the producers were eager to get this commentary in the can before the three of us girls scattered even farther in different directions. Despite placing an impenetrable candy coating on what was often a miserable existence, I was always very grateful for Girls Next Door and the opportunities it provided me. Who knows where I would have ended up if it hadn't been for the series? Perhaps still locked behind that giant gate, depressed as ever, or worse. Committed to fulfilling my obligations to the show, I agreed to come in that week. For the audio commentary, producers set Bridget, Kendra, and me in chairs around a monitor. They'd play each episode and we'd talk about what was going on in that moment or provide some behind-the-scenes details. Despite having only been away from the girls for a few weeks, it felt like I hadn't seen them in years, and it was so much fun laughing over the show with them. My jovial mood, however, wouldn't last. During the final episode, producers had cut a video montage of Hef's and my most romantic-seeming moments over the course of the last 5 seasons. With our breakup, not to mention the way he had treated me, still so fresh in my mind, I couldn't begin to manufacture any sort of sentiment for the commentary. In fact, the entire montage made me sick to my stomach. Really? I groaned into the microphone at our producer. Do you have to do this? Holly, Hef is a romantic, he said calmly. He wants to hear from you. It's gross, I protested. Do you have to put all this in? We're not together anymore. Nobody wants to see this. He seemed disappointed that I wasn't making this easier, but I didn't care. The montage seemed wildly inappropriate. Plus, Criss was growing more and more sensitive about my affiliation with Playboy. About a month into our living together, he started getting really upset anytime an article would surface linking me to anything Playboy related. His rants frightened me, but since I had foolishly already moved in with Criss, I gave him chance after chance, hoping that this was a passing phase. In my head, I imagined Criss watching this episode and completely going off the deep end, which is exactly what would happen. After we wrapped commentary, Bridget, Kendra, and I gathered around outside the studio with the producers and the crew, chatting about the season, what we loved, what we hated, etc. You know, Hef likes all the drama, Kendra began. We'd all had our complaints in the past, but this was the first time Kendra was so vocal in front of production. I guess since it was all over, she had nothing to lose. I remember one day we were all watching a movie, and afterward, Hef followed me back into my room. He goes, I'm really disappointed that you didn't sit closer to me. And it was so weird, so I just said, well, that's like where Holly sits, and I don't want to, step on anyone's toes. Then the dude stomps his feet and was like, I like the drama. Kendra's story hit me like a punch in the gut. While I had long ago tired of Hef's double standards, ridiculous rules, and belittling comments, this was the first time I really realized what a manipulator he was. Suddenly, it all became clear to me. The biggest reason I never got along with most of the girls in the house was Hef. He encouraged the infighting all along, despite his fake pleas for harmony. He was looking more and more pathetic in my eyes. I couldn't believe I had been manipulated for so long. I kept in touch with the show's producers regularly. Since I openly blabbed to the press about my hopes to do a reality show of my own in Vegas, they called to find out what I had in mind. They also contacted me regularly to invite me to Kendra's bridal shower and to confirm me as a bridesmaid for her wedding. It was difficult for me to communicate with them, though, because Criss seemed to be getting more and more paranoid about any affiliation I had with Playboy or Girls Next Door, and tried to talk me out of even attending Kendra's wedding. While his behavior troubled me, I could almost sympathize with it in my own twisted way. After getting some space between me and the mansion, I was truly beginning to realize just how poorly I had been treated and what a grim situation that had been, and so in a way, I saw Criss's behavior as him protecting me from Playboy. During one of Criss's performances, I waited for him backstage and found myself alone for the first time in weeks. Usually, I watched his shows from the audience or waited backstage with other members of his entourage, but that evening everyone else must have been occupied because I was the only one in the room. I decided to take the rare opportunity to call one of my favorite producers and catch up. The call didn't go quite how I had planned. Somewhere in the midst of our catching up, what was meant to be a friendly phone call turned into a berating session. I believe it stemmed from the fact that I didn't react the way they wanted to the Holly and Hef love montage during the audio commentary session. What I remember clearly is ending up in tears and trying to stick up for myself as he rattled off a list of complaints Hef had logged against me in a recent bad-mouthing session. I knew that when I made the choice to leave the mansion that I was leaving my spot on TV behind, but I certainly hadn't expected Hef to try and poison everyone I had worked with against me. My producer friend told me that all of the things I'd said during the commentary made everyone uncomfortable. Him, the crew, Bridget. Apparently, it had been okay for Kendra to rattle on and on about Hank throughout the commentary, despite having dated him behind Hef's back for the better part of a year. I guess because they had been planning a Kendra spinoff anyway, that was okay. True, they thought the spin-off was going to be about a wild single Kendra out on her own, but the concept of the show was easily adaptable to the idea of Kendra having a boyfriend once they found out about the secret months-long romance. I had thrown a wrench into their vision for Girls Next Door Season 6, however, so my behavior and honesty during the commentary was deemed wrong. It was incredibly hypocritical, but what else was there to expect from the same camp that thought we should all be faithful to Hef without him showing us the same respect? Seized by an anger that was bubbling up inside me, I phoned the mansion to confront Hef about what he was saying about me behind my back. For years, Hef had maintained friendships, however superficial, with most all of his ex-girlfriends. I had expected to receive the same politically correct treatment and made sure that anything I said about Hef in the press was favorable and kind. For some reason, though, I seemed to be the first ex-girlfriend that he was going out of his way to poison. "Hello?" Hef answered, not sounding particularly happy to hear from me. "Hi," I said, jumping in before he could stop me. "I've been told about all the things you've been saying about me, and it's not right. I did my best to be the best possible girlfriend for 7 years, and—" "Ha!" he shouted into the receiver, going on to accuse me of having had an agenda all along and reprimand me for not showing up at mansion events post-breakup. "I wanted to give you your space," I near screamed into the phone. "I'm not going to show up and push whoever you're seeing out of the way. I was never that kind of girlfriend. I'm not Tina. I'm not going to play that game." I was fuming. For so long, I tried to be, had been, in fact, a model girlfriend, and here was Hef characterizing me as if I were no better than all the two-faced manipulators he dated before me. I was just trying to move on and live my life, but my 80-something ex wouldn't stop talking smack about me to anyone who would listen. So much for exiting with any grace. He could only respond by ranting about how much I had supposedly changed and what a different person I was. He was right. I had changed, and in my opinion, it was for the better. And for the first time in a long time, my opinion was the one that mattered to me. After that call, I quit my job at Studio West. While I adored my position and the people I worked with, staying felt awkward. I needed to leave Playboy totally behind me. Plus, I was no longer feeling challenged. Hef had very cookie-cutter preferences when it came to Playmate shoots and layouts, so it wasn't long before I could do the job in my sleep. I felt like I wasn't learning anything anymore. Over the next year, I would routinely pick up the latest issue of Playboy to see the published pictorials. I was surprised to see the take on the Shannon twins in their pictorial. While the sunny, fresh-faced, tennis-themed photos that I directed, the same shoot that was seen on the Girls Next Door, were still included, the rest of the pictorial had a distinctly different flavor. The girls had been styled as mansion mistresses, lying on top of each other on a floaty in the mansion pool, one of them donning Hef's signature captain's hat, seductively straddling each other on Bridget's former bed, and climbing the grand staircase in nothing but cheap stripper store rhinestone jewelry. So much for the girl next door, I thought. The title of our reality show was inspired by the way Hef described the ideal playmate back in the 50s when he launched the magazine. Most women pictured in other publications of the era wore heavy makeup and very stylized hair. Hef wanted something different. He wanted his playmates to look young and fresh-faced, not like someone's older sister, which was how he described the look of most models at the time. Criss seemed absolutely thrilled that I had quit my job. He'd been pestering me to leave and insisted I use his publicity and management teams. Since Playboy PR had long ago started giving me the cold shoulder, I accepted. Over the few months that I was with Criss, my heart would sink any time I would see magazine articles featuring Bridget and Kendra together. It seemed as if Playboy PR was still working for them, and suddenly the two girls were pushed like never before. I was never contacted to be a part of the photo spreads and interviews, though, and it hurt to be the only one left out. Despite the other two girls moving on to new men, I was the only one Hef was determined to punish. In the media, Hef would always say what a great girlfriend I had been and that I was welcome back into his life at any time, which would always send Criss into a fury, but in reality, he wasn't being friendly towards me. Criss's explosive temper was becoming increasingly more alarming. I didn't want to go back to the mansion, Criss knew that, but it was as if he couldn't help his jealousy. For all his fame, fortune, and success, Criss, to me, seemed cripplingly insecure. This was starting to feel all too familiar. Before I met Criss, I had seen his television show and thought he was cute. Had I dug a little deeper and done some research on the guy, perhaps I would have been more hesitant to get into a relationship with him. According to reports in the press, earlier that year, Criss had threatened Las Vegas Review-Journal columnist Norm Clark in public, screaming, "Don't ever write another word about me or you'll need an eye patch over your other eye." The confrontation was written about in the paper and online, but I wasn't aware of it until I had already started dating Criss. Many of his public rants, though, happened after I left him. Apparently, he singled Perez Hilton out in his audience one night and called him the world's biggest douchebag asshole. And magician Joe Monty filed a police report that alleged Criss flipped out and assaulted him. Monty produced an audio tape with a voice that is allegedly Criss's saying, "Get out of my place before I knock you out." I wasn't surprised by any of it after what I had experienced. In the beginning, any fame I had, Criss loved. That was what made our relationship such a publicity boon for him, after all. But as time went on, his jealousy seemed to get the best of him. I remember him barking at me to cover up my hair as he yanked my hoodie over my head. He then went on to complain that my bright blonde hair was attracting too much attention. It was true. Even in his resident casino, people would often spot me before recognizing him. After an amazing Elton John concert at Caesar's Palace, we went backstage to say hello to the friendly pop legend. His dressing room walls were covered with shelves adorned with a massive bobblehead doll collection. "You have my bobblehead!" I squealed, pointing at two of my dolls nestled in among the immense collection. I have to admit, it was a total fangirl moment. I mean, who doesn't love Elton John? It was crazy spotting my dolls in his dressing room. Criss snapped that he had his own bobblehead doll coming out, shooting me a death glance. Who gets jealous of their girlfriend like that? I thought. We were supposed to be on the same team, but it was starting to feel more like we were in a one-sided who is more famous pissing contest. Before my last trip back to Los Angeles, I told Criss I planned to stay an extra day to take my car to the shop so that I could have some repairs done. He threw a fit, accused me of not caring about him, and told me I should put my car in his warehouse. Already, Criss had suggested I begin storing my valuables in his safe, including my diamond watch and the 2 pieces of jewelry he'd already lavished on me. To me, my car was a reflection of my independence. It didn't feel right locking it away, and honestly, Criss's apparent fascination with hoarding my valuables was beginning to make me uncomfortable. I canceled the car appointment and never mentioned it again. The last thing I wanted to do was put my car in his warehouse, and thankfully, I never did. Still, despite any trepidation that may have crept into my mind, I still wanted to believe we had a shot at making it together. It's easy to stand on the outside now and list the ways this relationship was clearly doomed, but I didn't have anything to compare it to. I had never been in a healthy, committed adult relationship before, so I didn't even know what was missing. With all my doubts, Criss seemed passionately in love with me, and that was what mattered to me at that time. The declarations of love from Criss flowed freely, and he talked in front of his friends about wanting to settle down with me. He took me back home with him to Long Island to show me off to everyone he knew. As the holidays approached, I was treated like I was already a member of his family. Since we were both December babies, I began thinking ahead to our birthdays. Criss had already scheduled our joint birthday celebration to be held at his favorite night spot, LAX, but I also wanted to keep a tradition that I'd developed over the last several years, a trip to Disneyland with a group of friends. Near my birthday, Criss and I planned a day trip to the Magic Kingdom and invited my usual guest list, which included a few girls from the mansion. As the day grew closer, my mansion friends suddenly became unavailable. "You won't believe it," said one of the girls who lived at the bunny house. "Hef heard you are going to Disneyland for your birthday and decided to take his new girlfriends the same day you're going." Seriously? I thought. Hef abandoned making the trek down to Anaheim years earlier. He suffered from chronic back pain, so having to walk more than a few steps at a time was incredibly uncomfortable for him. What are the chances that he all of a sudden decided to go to Disneyland on the very same day I would be there celebrating my birthday? It was a pathetic attempt to get in my face and perhaps try to remind me of his earlier accusation that the girls were only my friends as long as I was his girlfriend. I don't know what to do, she grumbled. He invited me to go with him, and I feel like I can't say no because I live in his house. This is really awkward. Several of the girls called to explain that they wouldn't be going with either of us. It was obvious Hef was trying to force them to pick sides, and they didn't want to get involved. If Hef wanted to go to Disneyland, that's fine, I told myself. He wouldn't deter my birthday celebration. Criss and I ended up spending the afternoon by ourselves. I asked our tour guide to help keep me from running into Hef's group, which was also on a guided tour, which I'm sure soured Hef's plans of ruining my day and flaunting the guests he had ripped away from my celebration. Despite avoiding Hef, it still wasn't the most relaxed day at the park. Criss spent the whole day trying to orchestrate candid paparazzi shots without seeming obvious, which I found embarrassing. I never mind having my photo taken, but I hated his sneaking around. The way he tried to hide his oh so obvious agenda from our tour guide made him look, to me, like a complete idiot. This was the first time I felt embarrassed to be with him, and it wouldn't be the last. Back in Vegas, Criss and I filmed a TV segment together for a local New Year's Eve special. The bubbly reporter who interviewed us was very interested in the diamond ring that sparkled on my finger. It wasn't an engagement ring, but the large diamond birthday gift Criss bought me piqued the press's interest nonetheless. For Criss's birthday, I wanted to get him something special. But what do you get the man who has everything, or at least could afford to buy himself anything he could ever want? I started reading interviews he had done online, hoping that it might offer me a clue or two. Criss had told a reporter that he was a huge fan of Salvador Dali. I'd never heard him mention art before, but why would he make something like that up? During one of my final trips to Los Angeles, I tracked down a rare Salvador Dali print at a Beverly Hills gallery. When I gave him the present, Criss tried to act impressed and thanked me vigorously, but didn't offer too much more. His manager, who was also in the room, seemed way more impressed than Criss. I thought. Maybe he doesn't really care about art after all. This was just one example of how the public Criss and the private Criss seemed like two very different people to me. For Christmas, I played it a bit safer. Criss had mentioned wanting to shoot a snowboarding episode of Mind Freak, so I commissioned Burton to create a custom snowboard and snowboarding gear. Believe it or not, he actually had the gall to ask me if Burton did that for me for free. So much for it being the thought that counts. All Criss seemed to care about counting was pennies. In return, Criss showered me with an audacious diamond cross necklace, making the previous pendant he bought me pale in comparison. He also presented me with another necklace, this one with a large diamond-encrusted infinity symbol pendant. On the back, next to the clasp, was a little charm that read in tiny diamonds, XOCA. Reading the huge smile on my face, Criss whispered that he had designed this especially for me and that he'd never designed jewelry for anyone before, not even his wife. Criss had been married before to his hometown sweetheart, but they filed for divorce after she learned that he had been spotted with an A-list movie actress. Criss never missed an opportunity to remind me of his high-profile conquests. Wow, I exclaimed, truly breathless at these elaborate gifts. I don't know what to say. I love them. He picked me up in a huge hug. No one had ever lavished me with such elaborate romantic gestures before. Even though Hef had dropped a few pieces of jewelry on me, they were always pieces of mass-produced Playboy branded merchandise, made even less personal by the fact that identical pieces were given to his other girlfriends at the same time. To me, it was the care that mattered, not the carrots. Criss offered to fly my parents to Las Vegas to celebrate the holidays with us. I was impressed and flattered that he showed such an active interest in getting to know my family, something Hef had never done. I think Holly should have her own perfume, Criss told my parents one evening over dinner. The slogan could be, Holly Madison, bring out the bunny in you. My dad couldn't help but stifle a laugh. Can you even use that? He asked Criss. Isn't that kind of a Playboy thing? Criss was beside himself. He'd spent his entire career surrounded by yes people, so he was completely at a loss for words and clearly uncomfortable that someone dared disagree with his idea. Ever the entertainer, Criss could charm the pants off anyone, in some cases literally. But I was disappointed to learn that, just an inch below the surface, he didn't appear to be the sharpest tool in the shed. Whenever he announced his next great idea, I usually fell silent. I didn't have the heart, for instance, to tell him that I wasn't interested in co hosting a regularly scheduled love sex pool party. Yes, that was the real name he actually came up with, at the Luxor with him. I felt sorry for him and didn't want to embarrass him. Criss asked me what my parents thought of him as we rode the elevator back up to his suite. He was clearly in need of some affirmation. "They liked you," I said with a big smile. After all, they hadn't told me they didn't like him. My parents confided in me that they found him a bit controlling, but they were seeing things I wasn't necessarily ready to accept. On the other hand, they saw that I appeared truly happy. Plus, seeing me with a man closer to my own age had to be a lot easier to swallow. He then asked me if I had told them I was in love with him. I told them I really liked you, I offered honestly. I'd already moved in with him, adopted so much of his life, and gushed relentlessly about him to the press. I wasn't going to profess my undying love to my parents after just 4 months of dating, no matter how much of a whirlwind our time together had been or how often we said it to one another. Criss pouted, crossing his arms, turning away from me, and grumbling, asking why he was even wasting time on this relationship. "Hey," I said defensively, "I don't introduce my parents to many people. This was a really big deal for me." The warm Mexican sun beat down on my shoulders as Criss and I sat at our beachside table eating sushi and drinking Coke Lights with our friends Barbara and Ron. Enjoying a few days off from the show, Criss swept me away to Cabo San Lucas for a late January getaway. "We're going to miss you guys," I bemoaned to Barbara beneath a perfect cloudless Cabo sky after a boating excursion. The couple's trip only overlapped with ours for a few days. They were longtime friends of Chris's and soon would become close friends of mine. The couple kept conversations lively and fun. They were the perfect antidote to the dark energy that I was starting to feel from Criss more and more lately. "Let me give you my info," Barbara said. "Text me anytime you're bored and want to go to lunch or something." "Thanks," I said, pocketing the business card with Barbara's information. After we finished our leisurely lunch and said our goodbyes, Criss and I went back to our suite. Criss snapped at me as soon as the door had shut behind him. He demanded I give him the card and forbade me from texting her. "Why?" I asked, confused. She seemed really sweet, but perhaps there was something about her I didn't know. He put his hand out, motioning with his fingers for me to cough up the card. He gave me a lame excuse about Barbara being over the top. It was clear that he presumed this was an acceptable explanation, and he considered the conversation over. Begrudgingly, I handed the card over to Criss. Thankfully, I had already saved her number in my phone while we were still at lunch. After the holidays, I finally began recognizing Criss's behavior as unusually possessive. In addition to his unreasonable temper tantrums, hoarding my most valuable possessions, and encouraging me to quit my job, he was showing yet another troubling sign, isolating me from my friends. He didn't want me spending time with anyone else. He often found excuses to keep me away from my phone and recently began demanding to see it when he saw me texting. Needless to say, I was scared of where this relationship was going. For the remainder of the trip, Cabo was hardly as relaxing. I soon learned that TMZ was reporting on our vacation. I never spotted the photographers. Judging by the photos, they appeared to be shooting us from boats off the coast or from neighboring hotel balconies. I later learned that Criss tipped off the paparazzi. He never turned down an opportunity for more press to distract from his show, which was now seeing more horrendous reviews. A review in the Los Angeles Times had recently said, "If Criss Angel were blindfolded, straitjacketed, run over by a steamroller, locked in a steel box, and dumped from a helicopter into the Pacific Ocean, he still might be easier to salvage from disaster than Criss Angel believe." Yikes. That night, Criss and I got into an awful fight, one of the first of many dramatic rows that would soon become a constant theme in the remaining weeks of our short-lived relationship. While the catalyst for the fights varied, the arguments themselves became somewhat formulaic. Here's how I would describe them. 1. Criss would become insanely jealous, usually a trigger associated with Playboy. 2. He'd accuse me of being a slut. 3. He'd say we should break up. 4. Criss would freak out if I didn't try to convince him otherwise or make attempts to save the relationship. I never did try to save the relationship during these tantrums. His outbursts scared me. 5. He'd calm down and tell me what a wonderful person I was and how lucky he was to be with a sweet girl like me. 6. He would then take me in his arms and tell me he loved me. I barely said anything during these rants, especially during the parts where I felt him getting hostile. His anger seemed irrational to me and was somewhat terrifying. By this time, it had become clear to me that I had traded in one controlling megalomaniac for another. If there was one thing you could say about me at that time, it was that I definitely had a type. There were differences, though. Hef was a master of manipulation and knew how to cripple a girl's self-esteem. Criss, on the other hand, just scared me. His anger filled a room, and while he never threw a punch at me, I was scared that something of that nature might be lurking around a corner. Once again, I was sleeping with the enemy. Only this time, instead of being trapped behind the mansion walls, I was Rapunzel locked high away in the penthouse of the Luxor Hotel. Criss had become so controlling that security shadowed my every move. I wasn't even allowed to go downstairs to grab a Starbucks in the lobby without a security guard or assistant being ordered to follow me. I started to wonder, was I really any better off than I had been at the mansion? After our trip to Cabo, Chris's performance schedule started to catch up with him physically. He no longer had the energy for any of the off-day excursions we used to do, and during his on-days, I had no choice but to adopt his routine. Criss wanted me to be with him 24/7, and he balked when I asked to go on simple errands by myself. We slept in most of the day, ate Mexican food in bed, and headed straight backstage 2 hours before the curtains went up so Criss could begin his pre-show ritual, get an hour-long massage, eat a sandwich, and sit for hair and makeup. And I thought mansion life got monotonous. Not only was I beyond bored, but my body ached from lack of exercise and activity. Fueled by his failing show, recently called A Dog by Variety, Chris's treacherous outbursts became more and more frequent. I spent most days walking on eggshells, hoping to avoid yet another landmine. My nerves were so frayed that I often felt faint and nauseous, causing female members of his staff to joke that perhaps I was pregnant. As I was showering one day, Criss popped his head into the stall. With a false air of casualness, Criss said he saw that Bridget was hosting a Valentine's Day party in town this week and asked me if I was planning on going. I think he was itching for a fight. I felt my body weaken and the lights start to darken as my eyes rolled towards the back of my head. Criss swooped me up before my knees could buckle, pulled me out of the shower, and ran over to place me on his bed. He grabbed his terry cloth robe to lay over me and snatched a leftover chocolate cookie from Subway that was sitting on his dresser. "Here, eat this," he said, tossing it to me from across the room. "What happened?" "I don't know," I uttered breathlessly. I just felt really faint all of a sudden. I unwrapped the cookie and took a few bites as he stood over me and watched. "I didn't plan on going to Bridget's party," I finally said. "I didn't think you'd want to." I was scared to mention Bridget in front of Criss. He had become so controlling, always demanding to look at my phone and trying to keep me from seeing or speaking to any of my friends. He seemed to have a major problem with Kendra ever since she announced her plans to marry Hank at the mansion, which I always thought was a strange choice considering the Kendra I thought I knew would probably have preferred a beach wedding. Criss was wild with jealousy at the very thought that I might attend. Apparently, that was the right answer because his spirits immediately brightened. "No, let's go to her party," Criss said in what had become a rare moment of happiness. I continued lying in bed for a moment, enjoying my cookie, my boyfriend's good mood, and the security in knowing he had just rushed to care for me. I was so relieved to have avoided another major blowout that I didn't even worry about what caused me to feel faint in the first place. In the first few months of 2009, my primary occupation was being Chris's moral and emotional support. When he flew to Los Angeles to tape a segment on Larry King Live, I traveled with him. Do you want to go on with Criss? One of his managers had asked me as Criss was being summoned onto set. Huh? I thought. I didn't come here to be on the show. I thought I'd just be sitting in the green room with the rest of the entourage that made the trip to Los Angeles. No, I'm okay, I said, waving my hands at Criss as if to say go ahead without me. Criss pleaded with me to go on with him, gesturing towards the sound guy who was already holding a second mic pack. I didn't feel like I had a choice in the matter. Okay, I said hesitantly, thanking God I wore makeup that day and wondering what I would talk about. I didn't realize it at the time, but apparently I was the sideshow attraction that was to be trotted out to distract viewers from the disastrous show reviews that Larry would certainly be bringing up. I had become used to being used for publicity at this point, but was still completely surprised by this particular ambush. Before, I had been used for photo ops, planted articles, and local Las Vegas programs, but this was prime time national television. It felt very uncomfortable. So, you've been on this show before, Larry said, giving me a pointed look. In 2005, I'd appeared on Larry King Live with Hef, Bridget, and Kendra to promote The Girls Next Door. It was obvious to me what he was thinking. To him, it seemed as if I was jumping from one rich boyfriend to the next with no purpose or pursuits of my own beyond being professional arm candy. And in a way, he was right. It hadn't been my intention, but the relationship with Criss proved so controlling and consuming that I hadn't been able to make any professional moves of my own. All of those dreams that I had been so enthusiastic about just a few months before had been shoved under the rug as my primary focus became being at Criss's side. Once again, a light bulb went on, and I resolved right then and there that I needed to make a change. It had become increasingly clear to me that I had jumped headfirst into this relationship way too soon. Having striven hard for fame the first 35 years of his life, Criss was an expert at putting on a charming facade and being able to win people over. After spending several months with him, the facade faded and I started to see what was underneath, what the real Criss was like. I learned that our views on politics and most social issues were vastly different. He had a fifth grader's sense of humor. His entourage had to muster up convincing fake laughs every time he repeated the same joke we'd heard a million times. I found him to be unintelligent, and he seemed virtually illiterate. He misused the word misnomer so much, even during interviews, that it made me cringe for him. It was disappointing to realize how incompatible we were, but I cared about him, so initially I just felt sorry for him. But as time went on, I saw a mean, bullying, and deceptive side of him, and I started to get disgusted. I had been so enchanted by this man and by my overwhelming desire to feel loved and needed that I hadn't even taken the time to get to know him before committing myself to him. I realized I needed an exit strategy, and fast. Criss insisted that I be present for every one of his performances. In the beginning, I would watch the show from a seat in the audience, and Criss would manage to work my name into the narrative and introduce me at the end along with his family. Initially, I thought it was sweet, but it soon became embarrassing. Eventually, he would suggest that I wait backstage with his bodyguard, which meant I would be there to greet Criss during his quick between-scene changes. He told me that having me there helped the shows go by faster for him. My mind was on my next step. Every time Criss went back on stage, I used those few minutes to pull out my BlackBerry and add to a list of what I needed to do. He was with me every other minute of the day, so this was my only chance. I quickly made a list. Find an apartment in Las Vegas, contact Crazy Horse Paris. Criss had successfully talked me out of accepting their offer to guest star. Get my valuables out of Criss's safe, etc. I wrote all of this in French so Criss wouldn't be able to read the notes the next time he snatched my phone away from me. Who are you texting? The bodyguard sneered at me, throwing me a suspicious look. No one, I said as I pocketed my phone. I'm just writing down some ideas. I was done. I had gone to bed, finally ready to leave Criss. He had started another one of his one-sided arguments over nothing, and I had had enough. I didn't even try to engage him, and instead quietly sat through the rant until he calmed down and I was finally able to go to sleep. The next morning, his fit clearly wasn't over. He stormed out of the master bathroom, tearing up a Valentine's Day card I had given him featuring my pinup portrait by Olivia on the front. Criss was screaming about having just noticed that the rendering included a pair of curled up pink bunny ears on top of my head, striking a deep nerve in this man. Criss finally said that he thought I should go back to my parents and that he would buy me a plane ticket. Okay, I said, barely louder than a whisper. I was afraid to argue with him. I silently congratulated myself on this easy out he had just provided me. He stormed out of the room and yelled loudly to one of his assistants to book me on a flight to Portland that afternoon. I crept out of bed and began gathering what I needed. Luckily, I still had a perpetually packed suitcase at the ready for my back and forth to LA trips that had come to an immediate halt a few months earlier. Criss asked me if I wanted to wear my jewelry, slyly eyeing the vintage Gucci watch I had purchased for myself, my small cross necklace, and the ring he had given me. Yes, I replied without thinking. It never occurred to me that he would actually expect the gifts back. After all, I had bought him expensive things too. When I finally pulled my things and myself together, I walked out into the living room of the suite. Criss's bodyguard was standing by to drive me to the airport. Bye, I said, giving Criss a cold, distant hug. Take care, he said, just as coolly, before planting a kiss on my head and asking me to let him know that I got in safe. I don't know what's wrong with me, I cried through a stream of tears. It's like, I know he's an asshole and I know he's not good for me, but I'm still so sad. I don't get it. I was home in Oregon, the same place where I had decided to pack up my little red Celica nearly a decade earlier. In some ways, it was as if nothing had changed and I was back where I started. I had no job, no man, and no prospects lined up. Luckily, my close friend Sarah Underwood lived in Portland and spent an afternoon listening to me as I poured my heart out. She was an absolute angel and held my hand through my frequent sobs. I was so grateful to have her there. She listened and offered me the best advice she could, but the real problem wasn't obvious to either of us at that point. Yes, I had just embarked on a high-profile romance that went wrong quickly and dramatically, but that wasn't really where my emotional crash was coming from. I was suddenly having to deal with my transition from the twisted world of Playboy into the real world. It was the unavoidable emotional fallout that had been postponed by my whirlwind romance with Criss. What was I going to do now? I thought, feeling hopeless. After a week in Oregon, my dad drove me to the airport and I boarded a flight to Los Angeles. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I was determined to brave the storm, despite the heavy burden of sadness I carried onto the plane with me. Criss's voice echoed in my mind, telling me I needed to go back to California. During a few of his tantrums, when he was mulling over a breakup out loud, he would always banish me to California as if he owned Las Vegas. Where I go and what I do isn't your prerogative, I thought, as if I now had a chance to respond to one of his treacherous rants. I felt like Hef was trying to sabotage me in Los Angeles by bad-mouthing me and leaving me out of Girls Next Door related press, and now Criss was trying to banish me from Las Vegas. Sorry, boys, it's not going to be that easy, I thought, pulling my hoodie over my head. I felt the rumbling of the plane engines beneath my seat. You haven't seen the last of me. Chapter 13. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think that very few things indeed were really impossible. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. After my breakup with Criss, I returned to La La Land absolutely lost. I knew that I wanted a successful career, but I didn't know how to go about achieving it. Since arriving back in Los Angeles, I was still reeling from the emotional fallout of my relationships with both Hef and Criss. For the first time in almost 8 years, I was entirely on my own, but this time I was carrying a whole load of emotional baggage behind me. What am I going to do next? God bless Mary O'Connor. After spending all those years at the mansion, Mary became more than a friend to me. She became like family. When she and her partner, Captain Bob, invited me to stay in their spare bedroom while I got my feet on the ground, I couldn't have been more grateful. While she remained Hef's loyal and loving secretary for more than 40 years, Mary was also a compassionate woman who knew I needed her, and knew damn well that Hef respected her too much to ever reprimand her for taking me in. Of course, I had my own apartment in Santa Monica, but I had become terrified of being by myself. I was desperately lonely and didn't feel at ease in my apartment. There was no security at my building, and the neighborhood in Santa Monica where it was located didn't feel very safe after dark. Every night, I noticed a truck parked across the street from my living room window with a man sitting in the driver's seat for hours. I have no idea why he was there, but I found it creepy. What I needed most was a comfortable, safe atmosphere surrounded by people who I loved and who wanted the best for me. It was the only way I could be sure that my next decision would be a smart one. I was scared of making another bad choice because I was anxious, lonely, or desperate. Despite Hef and the producer's incessant lobbying for my return to the mansion and the series, even though Crystal and the twins were already occupying our former spots, Mary encouraged me to make the best decision for me and to follow my heart. "It's better for you to be on your own," she told me. Mary had a wonderfully maternal nature, and I often looked to her for guidance. "You need to live your life. There's not much you can really do at the mansion." A few days after I arrived, I contacted Chris's assistant about shipping out everything I'd left behind in my hasty departure. When the boxes arrived on Mary's doorstep, I burst into tears. I knew I didn't want to be with Criss, but I was still broken. It's a humbling experience having a stack of cardboard boxes packed neatly with your belongings shipped back to you without even a single word. I felt like I'd been thrown out with the trash. When news of Chris's and my breakup eventually leaked to TMZ, Criss began calling me and sending me nasty text messages accusing me of tipping off the press. He angrily accused me of telling them. When I asked him who he meant, he said Playboy and went on to rant about how he knew this would happen and angrily said I had better be saying he broke up with me. There could have been no greater way of insulting Criss than if people assumed that I had been the one who actually wanted out of the relationship. I honestly didn't care what people thought. I was just happy to be a safe distance away from him. We had barely spoken since I left him in Las Vegas that morning, so needless to say, we never really discussed how we were going to handle our very public breakup with the press. I didn't know who told TMZ about our dissolution, since I had only informed my family and a few friends, but it seemed Criss was irate because he had his own ideas about how he would announce our split. Since we still shared the same publicist, we both got an email from him asking what kind of joint statement we would like to make about the breakup. Criss responded first, demanding that he tell them nothing. Our publicist quickly replied, "We have to tell the press something. If you don't, no one will ever want to cover you the next time you date a celebrity." Ouch, I thought. Hit him where it hurts. Eventually, we agreed to make a statement saying we broke up amicably due to scheduling differences, regardless of the fact that I had nothing to schedule. I don't know if anyone bought the excuse, but I didn't really care. The media and the public had become so used to seeing Criss run through starlets for publicity that I doubt many people ever believed our relationship was genuine. I was possibly the only one who had. Now that my relationship with Criss was behind me, I could finally focus on my future. Though I was tempted to waste away in Mary's spare room, I knew I had to take action. At the insistence of Criss, I had turned down most of the opportunities that had come my way shortly after I left the mansion, most of which Criss's jealousy didn't allow for. Besides Mary, no one associated with Playboy or Girls Next Door would have anything to do with me unless I abandoned my own dignity and returned to the mansion, which was the last thing I would do. No, I thought, I'm starting from scratch and I'm doing it on my own. I made a list of the things I still hoped to accomplish in my life and career. Being able to see my goals spelled out in front of me was an important part of the process. For my career, my list was pretty specific. 1. Develop a reality series that showcases the real Holly, apart from Girls Next Door, Playboy, and Hef. 2. Star in a Las Vegas show. 3. Appear on Dancing with the Stars. The list went on, but those were my main goals. Prior to leaving the mansion, I had interviewed for Dancing with the Stars and even met the producers. I had fallen in love with the series when its second season aired in 2006. The contestants looked like they were having so much fun, and I couldn't take my eyes off contestant Stacy Keebler's flashy costumes. Although I wasn't a dancer, I was dying to be on the show. It looked like the contestants were having the time of their lives. But despite how popular The Girls Next Door was at the time, rumor had it that one of the show's producers didn't think Middle America could relate to a young woman who had lived with an old man like Hugh Hefner. Determined to one day appear on the series, I tried revisiting the idea 2 months earlier during a meeting with Criss's managers. This was during the period he insisted on shaping my career. "So I called Dancing with the Stars," Criss's manager began, "since you told me you were interested in it, but they've already cast their upcoming season." Criss remarked snidely that Dancing with the Stars was a show for has-beens, and the only person to have ever done it right was Marie Osmond, because she did it right before she opened her show in Vegas. But other than that, it was only for has-beens. None of my career ideas were up to Criss's standard, so this one, like many others, was shot down. After making my list, I decided that tomorrow would be the beginning of a fresh start. I know what I hoped to achieve. Now I charged myself with the task of going out there and making it happen. Deep down, I knew that I would be okay. For the first time in weeks, I felt optimistic about my future. I knew I needed to gather my strength, so I decided to let myself sleep in before somehow starting a new life the next day. When I crawled out of bed later the next morning, I noticed I had 3 missed calls and voicemails from the same number on my BlackBerry. Each was from a producer at Dancing with the Stars urgently looking to get a hold of me. Holy shit, I thought, was I dreaming this? I listened to the voicemails again just to make sure I hadn't completely taken a dive off the deep end. The producer had hoped she had the right number since she was calling the phone number they had listed on my file from the first time I interviewed. It was such an uncanny coincidence that I had to believe that someone above was answering my prayers. Since they had just announced the season 8 roster a few weeks earlier, and the series was actually premiering the following week, I figured that casting directors must be beginning their search for the following season's hopefuls. "Hi, this is Holly Madison returning your call," I said nervously into my cell phone to whichever bigwig I just happened to call. In all the excitement, I didn't even remember the name of the person who had called me. The producer confided, after swearing me to confidentiality, that singer-songwriter Jewel had seriously injured herself during rehearsals and they were desperately in need of a quick replacement. "Would you be willing to do it?" she asked expectantly. "You would only have 4 days to learn your routine, while every other contestant has already had a month's worth of rehearsals." "Are you kidding? Of course!" I gleefully shouted into the phone. I couldn't believe my luck. "Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm beyond grateful for this opportunity." I continued to stammer, positively beside myself. "I can't believe it." She seemed totally relieved and let out a big laugh. It was meant to be. After giving her all my current contact information, I called my publicist, telling him the good news and swearing him to secrecy. My addition to the Dancing with the Stars cast was supposed to be kept quiet until they announced it live on the premiere episode. The next few days were an absolute Cinderella story. After signing the contract with Dancing, I was immediately whisked off to meet my new partner, Dimitri Chaplin, a new Dancing with the Stars talent who graduated from TV's other juggernaut dance series, So You Think You Can Dance. Production provided me with my first set of dance shoes for our rehearsal. 8 hours of practice later, my feet had erupted in terrible blisters, but I didn't care. I lined the shoes with moleskin before returning the next morning. Not even the pain in my feet could dampen my spirits as I skipped my way back to the studio, eager to continue our routine. Our first number was a cha-cha to Lady Gaga's anthem Just Dance. I was overcome with excitement. Could they have chosen a more perfect song for this particular time in my life? After the second day of rehearsals, I was swept away to the office of Emmy Award-winning costume designer Randall Christensen on the CBS lot to begin fittings for my first outfit. Side note, while the series airs on ABC, it's actually shot on the CBS lot in West Hollywood. Reminiscent of Hollywood's golden age, the costumes for each Dancing with the Stars episode are crafted in-house each week. In what felt like no time, Christensen whipped up a short, vibrant orange dress drenched in beaded fringe and Swarovski crystals. It was absolutely to die for. Even though I was the new girl on set, the producers, cast, and crew couldn't have been more welcoming. Everyone was an absolute delight to work with, and seemingly grateful that I had agreed to step in at the very last minute. Little did they know that this was the break I had been praying for, an opportunity when I truly needed it most. Was I nervous to perform my newly learned dance in front of a live studio audience and 22 million viewers watching live at home? Duh. But not too nervous to forget to have fun and enjoy my moment in the spotlight without any ominous boyfriend hovering over me. As long as I remembered the routine, I was going to be okay. My priority was to have a good time, work hard, and of course, enjoy wearing the fabulous sparkly costumes. Over the course of my tenure on the show, my scores were mediocre, my dancing wasn't great, and the 8-hour rehearsals 5 days a week were brutal, but I was having the time of my life. After practice, I'd make the drive back to Mary and Captain Bob's home in the valley and collapse on my bed. For the next month, my life would be eat, sleep, dance, repeat. After my debut, Criss eventually reached out to me to offer his congratulations. With distance and a bit of time between us, it appeared we could be civil. Some of his messages were very flirty or risque, but I didn't bite. I had heard through the grapevine that he had already moved on and was living with his current girlfriend. Plus, I knew Criss well enough to be certain that any sort of affirmation I was getting from him was most likely motivated by the new positive publicity I was receiving for being part of the Dancing with the Stars cast. For my part, I didn't resent him for how he had treated me, even though I could have. Instead of wallowing in the past, I chose to happily close that chapter of my life and be satisfied that we seemed to be on good terms. So you say I'm Holly. I was one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends at the Playboy Mansion, directed Freddie, a Dancing with the Stars field producer from behind the camera. I stalled. I don't really want to say that. Can I say something else? That's what they have here for you to say, Freddie said, looking down at his notes. I mean, that's how people know you. He didn't mean it as a jab. There's no way he could fully appreciate how negative that association was to me, or that I was so eager to separate myself from Hef. Can I say I'm Holly? I starred on the television show The Girls Next Door? I meekly and politely suggested, praying he would take the bait. I was so grateful for the opportunity, and despite the contract and grueling blisters, I was still slightly terrified the rug could be pulled out from under me, so I didn't want to go against even their smallest wish, but I just couldn't be labeled as Hef's ex. Not this time. Silence. Obviously, this wasn't my first foray into reality television, and I knew the executive producers had given Freddie the sound bites they wanted to hear. It was his job to make sure we stuck to the script. He thought about it a minute longer. Why don't you say, hi, I'm Holly. I was one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends at the Playboy Mansion on the show The Girls Next Door, Freddie suggested, hoping this would satisfy my concerns. I'm not going to say the girlfriend part, I said through a sheepish smile. I knew I was pushing the envelope. I didn't want to be difficult, but I had to finally stand up for my own dignity and self-respect. I'm sorry, I'm just tired of being branded that way. I mean, no one else would introduce themselves as somebody's ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, you know? Okay, if you absolutely don't want to say it, Freddie conceded with a shrug. In the end, I introduced myself as, I'm Holly Madison. I've been on the cover of Playboy 4 times, and I starred in a reality series called The Girls Next Door. Producers got their Playboy reference, and I was able to stand Hef free for the first time. One battle down, countless more to go. Being branded as Hef's ex was a label that would continue to haunt me for years, but one I would always fight against. I refused to let that be the most defining thing in my life. Besides the one-time introduction and a legitimately funny Playboy-related joke, where fellow contestant Belinda Carlisle said, I'm the former Miss August, then contestant Denise Richards said, I was Miss December, and then they cut to me saying, I've been Miss February, March, September, and November. I was able to steer clear of any Hef Playboy references throughout my run on the series. When an entertainment news program came to film one of my rehearsals, the interviewer asked, What do you have to say to Hef wishing you well on Dancing with the Stars? He must have read the perplexed look on my face because I hadn't heard anything from Hef since landing on the show. We taped a message from him and we want to hear what you have to say in return, he explained through forced excitement. What's going on? I asked my manager disappointedly, looking over my shoulder at him for help. Hey guys, this is really inappropriate, he immediately jumped in. He then suggested the interviewer wrap up the segment. Of course, it would have been great for Hef to wish me well, but I wasn't really buying it. If he wanted to say good luck, he could have easily gotten a hold of me. Instead, he used the opportunity to make a public statement and capitalize on the chance to look like the perfect gentleman. The whole thing felt insincere to me. A few months earlier, after Kendra announced her engagement, Hef publicly stated that she'd be getting married at the mansion and he'd be the one walking her down the aisle, before Kendra even fully agreed to it. Kendra later insisted that her brother give her away. It was creepy enough that she had to get married at her ex-boyfriend's house. Did I really expect any different from Hef? He had been a public icon for more than half a century, but still, after all this time, he felt the need to milk every possible publicity opportunity bone dry. Wounded by the mass exodus of his beloved girlfriends, Hef was struggling to avoid looking like he wasn't in absolute control of the situation. It wasn't enough that he had already restocked the pantry with 3 younger, blonder girlfriends. He needed to stay publicly involved in Kendra's and my new ventures as if he were still orchestrating our lives. Who knows? Maybe he meant well, but his behavior was suffocating and it motivated me to run even farther and farther away from my past. I realized that dancing could end any week for me, so I couldn't allow myself to become complacent. As much as I wanted to completely submerge myself in the show and enjoy every moment, I needed to quickly identify my next opportunity and strike while the iron was still hot. I suggested to my manager that we reach out to the Crazy Horse Paris again to see if they were interested in reopening our discussions. I have something else that I think you might be a good fit for, he countered. There's a new show opening at Planet Hollywood called Peep Show, and they're looking to replace the lead every 3 months. From what I had read about Peep Show in Robin Leach's column in the Las Vegas Sun, I knew it was a Broadway-influenced revue with a sexy fairy tale theme and a sultry Bo Peep as the lead character, hence the show's name. I'd seen some early marketing of the show around Las Vegas and didn't find the ads particularly appealing. In the posters, a shadowy, mysterious-looking Bo Peep and a sinister-looking Red Riding Hood lurked on a black background, the Bo Peep wearing a stock, trashy lingerie corset. Of course, when I finally saw the show, I realized how little these posters captured its essence and style. While it didn't sound very enticing, especially considering that I was looking for something more long-term, I agreed to take a look once I could get back to Las Vegas. In the end, I lasted about a month on Dancing with the Stars and had simultaneously gotten myself into the best shape of my life. With all that dancing, I could eat anything I wanted. McDonald's French fries with barbecue sauce, anyone? And I still had a six-pack. After my elimination, I embarked on a whirlwind press tour, appearing on Jimmy Kimmel Live, where Jimmy introduced me as one of Hef's girlfriends, oy vey, before being flown to New York for a bunch of interviews and appearances. I knew that I'd be returning to Dancing with the Stars in another short month to perform on the finale along with the other eliminated contestants, so I was determined to have secured my next gig before then. If I could announce my future plans on the finale in front of 22 million viewers, it would be perfect. With a few weeks to collect my thoughts, I made a special trip to Las Vegas to catch a performance of Peep Show. During my short stint there, I fell in love with the newly renovated Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino. The Peep Show Theater held an impressive 1,500 patrons. Most burlesque shows I had seen capped at around 300. Wow, I thought, they're really taking this show seriously. The theater itself was remodeled specifically for Peep Show, which told me that both the producers and the hotel intended for the show to stick around for a while. Large, exquisite props that looked like laced corsets beautifully covered the lobby's ceiling as mirrored walls glistened and glimmered around us like disco balls, lined with plush white Hollywood Regency settees. Around the theater, the peeping keyhole motif was everywhere, and 3 large runways jutted out from the stage into the audience. As the lights dimmed and the show began, larger-than-life LED screens glowed behind the stage, showcasing a magnificent black-and-white video of its current star, Kelly Monaco, a fellow Dancing with the Stars alum, former playmate, and soap actress. At the time, the show had 2 headliners. The other was former Spice Girl Mel B, who played the role of Peep Diva. Kelly finally entered the stage wrapped in white acrobat silk hanging 30 feet above the ground. The routines, dance numbers, and acrobatics were jaw-dropping. Even though the best routines didn't even feature Bo Peep, it didn't matter. I was seriously impressed. It felt somehow as if the part of Bo Peep had been written specifically for me. The character begins as a modern-day woman who can't find love. After drifting off to sleep one night, she finds herself in dreamland being led through a series of vignettes, each teaching her how to be confident and sexy. In the end, she finds her man only after finding herself. As the performers took their final bows at the show's end, I leaned over and shouted in my manager's ear over deafening applause, "I want in!"
All right, guys, that was chapter 13. When we start again tomorrow, we're going to be on the last chapter, and we will be done with this book. We will be done. What do you guys think about it so far? Kimberly, what do you guys think about? Did y'all hear some of the stuff that happened? Isn't it crazy? Isn't it crazy? On that note, I'm going to end here. And you guys have a happy Thanksgiving, and we will be back tomorrow in the morning. I'm going to do it early in the morning so we could just play it and folks could listen while they continue their cooking. Very interesting, isn't it, Janice? Yes, it is. Very interesting. I have Brooke Shield after that, and then I have another one. I don't know if you guys heard of this young lady. Hold on a second. Let me see if her name is Eva Ionesco. Eva Ionesco. She was the young lady that was posed in what's the name? At the what do you call it? At the mansion. She was young. I think she was 14 or 15. Her and Brooke Shield was the youngest one that was posing. I don't know if you guys remember her, but this is her. I'm going to show you a picture of her. Do you guys remember her? I'm going to show you. Yeah, I'm going to show you her. Hold on a second. I don't know if you guys have seen her. Okay, here's the picture of her. Hold on a second. I'm going to show you who she is, and maybe some of you guys might remember. Let's see if you guys remember her. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, here she go. I'm going to show you her. There she go. I don't know if you guys remember this young lady. Do you guys remember her? That's the one. She posed in Playboy first, and then she posed in Penthouse. She was very, very, very young. Very young. She was a baby. Look at her face. Look at that baby. Yep. Yep, that is. She posed in, and there was a lot of controversy with her, as well with Brooke Shield, and there was another one that from my investigation about her. Yep. I don't know if you guys remember this picture of her. Let me show you a picture of her. Another picture of her. This was like really like, I mean, an innocent baby. Hold on a second. Let me end up this one. Let me end this one and bring you up the other one. Let me show you the other picture of her. Here you go, the other one right here. Here, look at this. This is her other picture. So look at that. A baby posing in the nude for some pervert, for some pedophile. Yep. For some pedophile. Look at that baby. I mean, look how how young she was. She looks very young, right? For the pedophile to have jerk off for her picture. Can you believe that? Yep. But nobody will tell you about that. They won't tell you about that, will they? Yeah, I've been doing my research on all of this stuff. Yep, a child, Beanie. A child, an innocent baby. Look at her. Look how little her hands are. Yep. An innocent baby. So that is it for today, guys. Yep. Yeah, Kimberly. Yeah, she posed in Penthouse and Playboy. She said here she was exposed to the limelight as a mere toddler. The French actress did not exactly have the best childhood. She is the daughter of Miklos Berlin, I don't know her name, and Iria Ionoska, a French Romanian photographer who framed for her notoriety in 1970. Eva was raised in a hometown and first gained fame as a child model. As early as age 4, Eva's mom made her young daughter a star model in some controversial and explicit photo. Can you believe it? At 4 years old. Can you believe this crap? 4 years old. Guys, 4 years old. Her mom had her taking explicit photos, sexually explicit photos. Eva did not just model in raunchy photos for her mother alone, but she also for other famous photographers. Thus, many frowned at the young model's continuous exposure of her infertility, sexuality, stirring a major controversy in the early 1970s. Eva and her sibling were consequently taken away from her mom at 1977, and they were eventually raised by foster parent. So they put her in foster care. In 1976, she made history as the youngest model ever on the PG rating Playboy magazine. And the 1978 Spanish issue of Penthouse. Yeah, can y'all believe that, child? Can y'all believe that? Can you guys believe that? You're welcome, Kimberly. See, but yeah, it was a crime, but they put her in foster care, but nothing happened to her mom. Nothing happened to the people that was taking pictures of her. Nothing happened to them. They just took her away and put her in foster care. She was in Paris, and back in 1979 when she was 13 years old. She was in the nightclubs in Paris. Look at how old she was when she was married. Look at the guy she married to. Look how old he looked compared to her. Hold on, I'm gonna share something with you guys. I'm gonna show you how old he looked. Look how old he looked compared to her. Look at the guy she married. Isn't that crazy, y'all? Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Look how old he is compared to her. And then she turned around. She sued her mom in 2012. Eva sued her mother, Irina, for not only taking prerogatives, erotic photos of her as a child, but also for a stolen childhood. The French Romanian photographer was later ordered to pay 70,000 francs in damages and compensation for breaching her daughter's privacy. She was also ordered to hand over some negative photo of Eva and was banned from selling and transmitting and exhibiting images of her daughter without her consent. Interestingly, Irina also sued her son-in-law, Libertari, for the invasion of privacy and lost the following for his novel Eva, which was inspired by his wife and dedicated to her. Yep. So she sued her mom. Where is she now? I don't know. I can go check in to see where she is. Maybe I could interview her. Interesting. I'm gonna look for her, y'all. I'm gonna look for her. See if she has an IG or something. She probably don't. She's a year older than I am. Let's see. Let's see if I can see if she has an IG. Aniska. There's a whole bunch of them in here. I don't know which one it is. Let me see which one is her. Look like her. This might be her right here, y'all. I'm gonna take this off. This might be her. Look. See, it might be her. It might be her. think this is her. Can y'all see this? Oh, I can't show it right. She's still posing nude. Look at this. She's still posing nude. Yeah, I think this is her. Look. Yeah, this is her. See a picture? It's in French. I can't let it. Okay, it might translate. It's in French. Can't understand this. Okay, it is her. Wow. She said, the biggest game in my life. I made a movie with Maria, residents in surveillance. Look, she looked like she was on. They put her on drugs. Look at her face. Like she was drugged out. Well, her mom started taking pictures of her since she was 4. That is ridiculous. Look at her right here. Look at her right there. Look. Can y'all see that? Look how young she is. Look at that baby. Can y'all see that? This is crazy. This is nuts. Wow. Who's this? Look at this guy, y'all. Look how he dressed like a woman. Look at him. He look like a woman. Where you going now? Hey. See, look at that. The guy is dressed like a woman. Look. Y'all see him? They're all over the place. It's a bunch of nude pictures and she was young. She was a baby. I cannot believe her mom did that to her. Yep, it's sad. All right, guys, I'm about to go. I will see you guys later. I think Choke is live. So I'll check you guys later. Guys, have a happy Thanksgiving. Hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. Yeah. All right. Later.